Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
A wedding at Mr. Matt's house was bound to make a lasting impression, above all on the owner of the mansion. The best people of the city fought for the right to sit at the same table with the most successful man in this part of the world. Wedding is not only beautiful gifts, fancy dress, and invited stars. It is also a great opportunity to discuss new contracts and share another piece of the pie, which economists will later call super income. Mr. Matt only needed to snap 2 fingers to have his table immediately covered with the best delicacies and delights. And the rumor was complicated by stars and celebrities. George was in charge of vegetables, the freshest tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers from his greenhouses, herbs and lots more. Charles claimed to have personally slaughtered a lamb, 2 piglets, and got into a real battle with chickens and turkeys, as long as there was enough meat and poultry on the table. Giovanni Greca, concerned about fish and seafood, salmon, tuna, shrimp, huge lobsters, and other select delicacies. But Luca Moretti and his family prepared a giant cake, which was too much even for this crowd of 200 guests. He delivered it together with a transparent refrigerator to the generators and placed it near the main table. Lower-ranking guests provided fresh bread and rolls, salads, appetizers, and other snacks, without which a wedding would never be a celebration. 2 themed areas were set up on a huge plot of land near the house. On one performed modern music compositions, on the other retro and classics of Franz Bianca. The most talented sound engineer of the present day arranged the musical streams so that they did not overlap. "We Italians have to help each other," smiled Mr. Rinaldi, who was in charge of the groom, and coincidentally the bride's gorgeous dress. Like jewelry or heirlooms, vestments, here we brought in a special box, inside of which was maintained microclimate. "I'm an American," Mr. Matt said loudly, "and put this place out of your mind." "I beg your pardon, Mr. It's ingratiating," said Rinaldi. "I meant to say we Americans should help each other." He had reason to be nervous. Today, the Rinaldi family was to go one step higher. From now on, he would take on the toughest challenges. Construction contracts on the coast would cover his skyscrapers. Sports arenas would spring up here and there, each of which he would keep a small stake in for the sake of management and profit. And his son, will get the most gorgeous and wealthy girl in this part of the earth. "Where is James?" unceremoniously asked Mr. "He's the one who should be standing here like a bayonet waiting for me to give the word. But you know the traditions, don't you?" Once again looked ingratiatingly at the millionaire Rinaldi. "He'll come with an orchestra. There will be a beautiful song and then a dance. Even if we've become Americans, that's no reason to forget the music." "Ah, tradition," mumbled we this. He wished this interminable day would come to a logical conclusion sooner. Talking in a panebristic manner to Mr. Rinaldi, the construction magnate, he was only hiding his own insecurity. Wacko needs Monica as much as she needs him. Or rather, he needs Mr. It needs this alliance to solidify its position and become all-powerful. The construction empire will take its rightful place in his business package along with manufacturing, tourism, and gambling. Yes, he is strong and powerful. No business is solved in the city without his weighty word, but his own financial strength is woefully lacking. The Rinaldi family are other wordless toilers. They can cover the whole world with these boring and tasty tasks, which, nevertheless, are very well worth and perfectly sold. They have huge circulating resources that will help it get stronger. "Oh, Rinaldi," said this and clapped his hands loudly. "There's a tradition you and I have forgotten. Let's drink a glass of wine with cheese and meat in honor of our union with you, so that this day went as per notes." The groom's father smiled. He was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the nasty mood of it. But here he seemed to feel a little better when he remembered the meat and wine. As if by magic, a waiter with a huge tray appeared near them. How he could only hold the enormous tray. He meticulously selected a red dry wine with a long aging. Mr. It himself filled 2 glasses to the brim and held one out to Rinaldi. "Let's raise a glass to the fact that our cities are united," proposed the master of the house, and like branches of noble grapes intertwined, and from them turned out a beautiful wine, which will be chased by the best houses of the world. Bottoms up. A fine toast, praised Rinaldi. Unlike his vis-a-vis, he was not good at impromptu speeches, preferring to pay money to a professional writer. He's prepared an excellent speech for the ceremony. It's waiting on his tablet, but he forgot the welcome toast. "That's all you're gonna say?" Surprised. That's how he froze with his glass raised. "I want to say," stretched Rinaldi and tried to gather his thoughts, "that our children with you will erect the world's tallest skyscraper. Rinaldi's name will be Rinaldi, and there will always be lights on all the floors for us." Meta touched his expensive glassware to his new relative. The toast was beautiful, but the fact that the family's proud surname was to be relegated to the background. Disappointing. It was an issue he'd forgotten to discuss when he'd dealt with all the formalities of the wedding. Nothing. The grandchildren may well want to carry his surname. Good thing it sounds beautiful. "Well," Rinaldi said, the master of the house, emptying his glass and snacking on ham, "it's time for me to check on our star guests. You haven't forgotten who will be performing on our stage tonight, have you?" Of course, it would cost a fortune for an outsider to bring in so many celebrities, but many of them owed Mr. This the beginning of their careers, and therefore agreed to perform for free, and the millionaire only had to pay for the flight and hotel. It was already 5 o'clock, and the guests gradually began to arrive. They all approached Mr. Matt, shook his huge striped palm, and wished prosperity and prosperity to the new family. The master of the house wore a luxurious suit, despite the heat, but on his broad forehead did not even appear vapor. "How wonderful is the weather." Mrs. Smith, the wife of the owner of a large retail chain, smiled. "Specially for you," smiled back at Matt. "Thank you for the cheeses you sent to our table." "Oh, it's such a small thing," Mrs. Smith waved her hand. "You should have seen the gift Angie prepared for our young ones. Would you sign a lifetime contract with us for your Italian oils?" "Mister, it's an exclusive contract." The landlord smiled even wider. "But no," he thought haughtily. "You can't buy me that cheap." Matt liked total control over the situation, and so every half hour his secretary, a charming girl named Anush, called him and reported whether everything was going according to plan. Chief of Security Tan reported every hour, reporting anything suspicious. "If you see even a shadow." Leet whispered to Mr. Matta, talking to Tom. "Nothing and no one should mar this day." "That's right," Mr. Joe replied, the head of security. "The situation is under complete control." Mitta was very fond of his faithful guard, who resembled a dog in his devotion. The one by animal subtly felt his master. For example, it was he who came up with the idea to remake the name Giuseppe to the American form of Joe. The Mr. was very pleased with that. Yes, that's what he started calling himself. The call came from Angie 5 minutes ahead of the checkout time. "Mr." said the secretary, puzzled. "We have a strange guest here. It's on the list." Roughly asked us this. Full control, in his opinion, did not mean diving into every detail. "But since these nitwits can't do otherwise, no." Anush replied, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, it's some ancient old woman. She's demanding you come down because of her diction. I can't understand whether she wants to give or take something. Put her on." "I ordered it." "Yes, Signora Mr. Giuseppe. There's an old lady whose voice is on the other end of the line." "Mr. Giuseppe, who am I?" "Me?" The millionaire's steely voice rang out. "I don't recognize it." "Measure for line," continued the old lady in her sweet voice. "I happen to know that there was such a joyous occasion in your house that I couldn't pass by. You have no idea what a journey I have made. I came from far away. So we are strangers." Cut Matta off. "I'm sorry, Signora, but I did not invite you to my house this day." I know you've forgotten." The old lady's, whose voice on the other end of the wire was getting louder. "Don't worry, mister, don't worry. I'm not offended. I'm often forgotten now. I need Giuseppe's help. Asked the old woman and immediately switched to you. Only you can help me. Only you, Giuseppe. Put the phone back on, ma'am. A test of strength. Mr. Joe. The millionaire's broad forehead was showing from. He didn't sweat at all until he started to get nervous. Mr. Matt made a brief gesture to the waiter, literally one with a Coke. The one, as if having read the big boss's mind, ran up to him and swiped it neatly. It was as if the landlord was not on the phone, but performing a complex operation. He said, "Mother, send this old woman away. And if she persists, call the police. The sheriff promised me they'd have a car around here somewhere. But Mr. Joe, outside, the secretary, she says she needs help and she has important information." I said drive. Demanded the millionaire not to bother me about such nonsense anymore. Because, you know, there's a whole line of people wanting to take your place. There were more and more guests. They were occupying a huge section of Mr. They were touring the luxurious interiors of his mansion. They tasted the appetizers and examined the table that was set right in the garden. The stylists finished decorating the photo area, and a good dozen photographers were walking around the guests so that everyone could fill their ribbon with great pictures. Now we need to get to the most enjoyable part of this ceremony. His daughter, his baby girl, is finally going to jump out in marriage. This furtively brushed a tear off his prickly cheek. Soon, very soon, he will be babysitting his grandchildren, teaching them how to shoot a slingshot and kick a soccer ball. The phone rang again. I told you to drive that damned old woman to hell. Trial of strength. Millionaire, Mr. Mehta. Stammering, said the secretary. It seems, there's been an emergency. What kind of emergency? Calmly, the head of the family clarified. He was famous for his ability to keep his composure in any, even the most difficult situation. A catastrophe. Anish screamed. 3 or 4 o'clock, before the fateful call of his assistant, Mr. Ito decided to make sure that both the dress and hair of Monica correspond to the highest level of the ceremony organized by him. His daughter decided well in the guest house where all her friends and girlfriends were comfortably accommodated. Matt let them walk around all night, and even paid for the food and drinks himself. That's an unprecedented move on his part. As long as the kids were happy. He explained his act to the head of security, who was worried about safety, keeping an eye on them, but through his fingers. The kids, most of whom were now approaching the age of 25, didn't fail, didn't break anything, didn't cause the police to be called. And if anyone was being domineering, it wasn't his daughter, or she did it without anyone noticing. Now in the room were workers to this ring. When young people want to continue hiding from the adults, everything should be ready. Very young boys and girls were arranging a slide of glasses through which the champagne would soon flow. And one waiter looked Mr. It straight in the eye and smiled impishly. Where on earth had he seen him? Ignoring the familiarity of the millionaire, strode to the second floor. He kicked the hairdresser and makeup artists out of his daughter's room and asked her girlfriends to leave. Then he rose from his chair and meticulously examined Monica, trying to find the slightest flaw. But no, everything was perfect. Did his daughter, his pride and joy, really look like the $5-6 million he had invested in this wedding? Congratulations to you, daughter, he whispered, hugging Monica gently. The main thing was not to wrinkle the dress or damage the makeup. The photos will decorate the main news feeds of the agencies, and therefore should not drop the authority of Matt's family. Challenged with what? Monica asked. With being able to tie your business to the Rinaldi family. Mr. This froze like thunderstruck. From whom but his daughter? A clever and calculating girl. He didn't expect to hear anything like that. After all, he had offered her a choice of 3 suitors, and she herself had settled on Vasco. The young man, of course, was a bit of a god. And in his Mr. This presence, he generally swallowed his tongue like a snake. But all in all, the guy was great. And he certainly loved her. He loved her. Yeah, the guy's a slob. But that's exactly what Monica needed. And importantly, with the financial ability to fulfill all her needs, which can grow over the years. What do you mean by that? Dad asked. What I mean is shut up. Suddenly shouted Mr. I don't even want to hear it. Any girl in your place would be dancing with joy. And you're just as nosy as ever. Why don't you ever want to hear me? Monica asked. And there were tears in her eyes. And there were tears in her eyes. Everything I do for you and for the family, replied Mr. This, trying to give his capital voice tenderness. You should be grateful to me. You know James is not the hero of my novel, sighed Monica. Yes, we'll settle well. He loves me. He's been very gentle with me. But to live with him all my life, I'd die of homesickness. Mr. thought about it. He certainly shouldn't have upset his daughter on a day like this. She will marry James anyway. It was a done deal. But she'd remember his pressure and despotism for the rest of her life, which means she'll hate him. I had to sweeten the pill. Fortunately, he had already taken care of this issue a month ago and prepared a gift that would make any girl fly to the seventh heaven with delight. Forgive me, darling. Forgive my pressure and this arrogant tone. You know how hard it is to make these decisions, but I'm the one who takes full responsibility for them. Here you go. We said it, holding out a ring to our daughter. I've prepared a gift for you. What is it? Asked the bride. It's a real heirloom. With delight, said the father of the family. Can you believe that this trinket was worn by the wife of the first president of this glorious country? Monica looked at the ring meticulously. It looked really beautiful, but was it worth spending a lot of money on something like that? The girl imagined how her father's men had gotten it. Maybe they had stolen it from a museum. And what if they hadn't? She didn't even want to think about that. Wear it with pride. We said it solemnly. It's a gift from me personally. And do not forget for a second, dear, that we are Americans with an Italian surname, sarcastically said Monica. What's the point of all this? Are we Italian, American, or Jewish? What's the difference? How dare you? Mada was indignant. Me and my parents have endured abuse and insults all my life, just so that you could be representatives of this God-chosen nation. And without my last name, no important issue is decided in this city. Isn't that God's plan? I've told you 100 times I'm not interested. Monica snapped at me. I just want to make my own music. You hear it. There she went again, talking about her stupid songs. Joe was already cursing the day many, many years ago when he'd given his daughter a guitar and taught her a few chords. Yes, she sang wonderfully, but he'd seen her financiers with brains like hers. She could multiply her family's fortune 10 or 20 times over. What awaits her on the stage? First, you have to invest a whole ton of money without any guarantees of return. A star's career lasts 5 or 10 years. And then what? But no, you can't take any chances. Even though I'm American, we said it threateningly, losing control of ourselves. But I might as well take an Italian whip and tap dance on your international ass. Sorry, Po, immediately replied Monica, who understood the reality of such threats. The best men in town and country are doing your wedding. Couldn't settle down. Millionaire, do me the courtesy of at least smiling. Keep your thoughts to yourself. What's gotten into you today anyway? Because I'm in love with someone else. Monica explained. Who? Mr. Matt asked. He was going to explain to her that you can live with one person and love another. The main thing is to do it carefully, so as not to create rumors and speculation. And as soon as Monica opened her mouth, the phone rang. Tony Class, the eccentric billionaire Mr. Joe had pinned his hopes on, had arrived. Not a word. Asked it, raising his hand. I love you, daughter, Mr. Tony, said the master of the household in as kind a tone as his speech apparatus was capable of. What an honor and a surprise. I'm on my way. So the guests have arrived. The tables are bursting with refreshments, and the musicians on both stages still continue to fill the air with beautiful melodies. However, Monica is missing, and there's no clarity on her disappearance. The saddest part is that no one saw where she went, neither her stylist, makeup artist, nor her girlfriends. It's like she vanished into thin air. It's Mr. This is the dilemma of canceling the wedding or hoping that Monica's kidnapping is a bad joke. Santi, her best friend, was crying, clutching a teddy bear in her hands and somehow nursing herself back to health for what had happened. The local police office sent 2 detectives at once to speed up the investigation. The gentleman went along with it. His weight was too high. "Tell me again," asked one detective, tall, thin, addressing Santa. But no tears. "Honey, what happened?" Musicians in traditional Mexican attire entered the guest house. She was sobbing. "I don't know who booked them. They started playing their songs, doing round dances with us. When I came to my senses, I saw that Monica was nowhere to be found, and I sounded the alarm." "How long did the singing, dancing, and destruction of tequila last?" the tall detective asked. "I don't even know," stretched out to Sante. "Maybe 20 minutes, or more." "And when was the last time you saw Monica?" Santi looked expressively at Matt, tearing up again. "When her dad, Mr. Joe, came by and kicked us out," she said. "And that was before the Mexican band." "Maybe she went somewhere else?" asked the second detective, the short, fat one. His appearance was so disgruntled that This felt like giving him 105 to lighten his mood a little. "The phone was left on the bed," declared Sante with renewed vigor. "And after all, she doesn't go anywhere without her phone." The 2 guards that were on duty outside the guest house didn't see anything suspicious. On behalf of This, they questioned all the youths and waiters, writing explanatory notes on behalf of everyone. But where had his daughter disappeared to? In her gorgeous dress, no one had noticed. Now the short, fat detective was leafing through the notes, and his disgruntled look grew even more grim. For a moment, the policemen looked at each other and took up their positions beside "This case sucks," said the disgruntled cop, short in stature. "If it's a kidnapping, it's a masterstroke. Hats off, as they say." "Do you think it's funny?" asked Millionaire Mr. Joe. "If it is a crime, do you have any enemies? Do you have ill wishers? Do you have any idea who might have kidnapped her?" asked the thin and tall Detective Stanley, thoughtfully biting his pencil. "Who?" roared Mr. Matt. "Yes, any cretin who has a desire to become $1 billion or 2 richer, or whatever the usual demands are for kidnappers, daughters, millionaires." "Have you been given any demands yet?" Detective Brandon clarified. This bigwig with the loud voice was starting to annoy him. Like a whole bunch of self-righteous assholes, a bunch of them in his precinct. "No, none at all," pulled Matt. "The groom's dead." The cops looked at each other. "Are we having a murder?" asked Stanley. No, waved his hands at the millionaire hobbit morally. "He loves my daughter very much. Was it really painful to look at you?" He sobbed like a girl, trying to tell his side of the story. They'd been dating for 6 months, but they'd only slept together a handful of times. It wasn't the Italian upbringing, it was Monica's nasty temper. "We knew that American women treated flat relationships differently than Italian women. Sleeping with 2 or 3 guys before marriage in the U.S. equated to complete innocence, and his daughter was so caught up in local tradition that she could pass for a Native American woman in terms of sexual freedom. But she preferred to keep you on starvation rations, an approach he understood and even shared." Detective Brendan looked out the window from the 2nd floor of the guest house. There was a stunning view of the courtyard. Beautiful music was playing, some kind of country music. The blue pool rippled in the sunlight. Now I'd like to throw off my jacket, shirt, and pants and dive into this sinful water. And call for the waiter with an ice-cold drink. His partner stood beside him and stared at the courtyard, and stared at the courtyard too. They had been together so long that they had learned to read each other's minds. It caught both of their eyes as a girl with a short haircut, dressed in black pants and a white blouse, bustled about the property. She was rushing only to some guests, who to others, explaining something to them. The detectives looked at each other. "This is your secretary, Mr. Joe," asked Stanley, pointing to the agile girl. "Secretary about it." He hated it when they added all those suffixes and endings to normal male professions. "And don't you dare utter feminism in my house." Stanley was silent. Oh, those rich people, the detective thought. Their own quirks. She's the one who sounded the alarm. "So invite her here," Brenton asked. "And please, let's not waste our time on the subtleties of the English language. We detectives mostly use the unprinted version, but it's not like we brag about it on every corner." The guests had no idea that this was an emergency at the multimillionaire's house. The music continued to play, photographers took pictures, and animators kept the audience entertained. Waiters were passing cold drinks and appetizers. You can't fool these people, though. Successful people have something like a sixth sense that tells them the right decision. The richest and most powerful. They were getting nervous. Being out here in the sun all day wasn't part of their plan. Tony Case, eccentric inventor and billionaire, is already tweeting about it. "It's past 12 o'clock. Still no young people." Did he write, "Will there be a wedding today? Will there be a wedding today? Or are we talking about a grand dress rehearsal? A few words for the press," shouted Tony, beckoned the receptionist. "That's my joy. What's all the fuss about? I love tedious waiting, but today it was too tedious." And Mr. Tony shrugged her shoulders. "There's such a thing, you know, such a thing. A life-saving phone call." Mr. It barked into the receiver to urgently go up to the second floor of the guest house. Angie gave Kesa another smile, promised to look into everything, and rushed to her patron. Although the girl wasn't in charge of security and was the first to sound the alarm, she still felt a keen sense of guilt to think Monica was missing. This is a charming and intelligent girl, her bitterest competitors in the fight, and for Mine's, her fiercest rivals in the battle for Mine's attention, it seems to have dissolved. "Mr. Joe," she screamed. "What do we do, Mr. Joe?" "First, calm down," said it in her steely voice. "Second, listen to these gentlemen. I'll call a council and decide how to proceed with the wedding." The millionaire went into the next room and picked up the telephone. His active soul wanted to move, to investigate, to find out. But he understood nothing of police business. On the contrary, he had always avoided meetings with officers of the law. Of course, he had something to hide from the law and the authorities. But now, alas, he could not do without them. "We'll have to put up with it. This neighborhood is annoying. Shall we split up?" Brandon suggested. "You keep staying at the guest house, and I'll start watching the video. I bet we'll find the answers to any question we want to ask." Stanley nodded his mind. Brenton's is organized in such a way that he's better able to work with a vast array of information. Where the average person would have a stupor, this full-blown detective showed marvels of acumen. The detective went into the next room, where there was a high table, and began to arrange his gadgets on it. "Good idea," Stanley said. All he had to do was talk to Fatty's secretary. The huge leather couch was just the right size for tall Stanley. His feet rested on the ground while he leaned on the backrest, a blissful position for a Russian to sit in. The detective felt that this young beauty with the short haircut could definitely be useful to him. But in what way? "My name is Stanley," he said to the girl, Detective Stanley. "We're investigating the kidnapping of Monica. This simple," she replied. "Call me Angela." "What a rare name," smiled Stan. But the girl didn't react. "So, you were the first to sound the alarm. My partner and I saw through the window how you literally calmed the neighborhood and probably saw all the guests." "That's right," the girl replied. "Mr. Maitredi ordered me to personally check everyone." "Checked," the detective clarified. "At the entrance, I made sure the invitation matched the list. He's a sexist, you know, in a good way. Guests don't like all those guards he wants. A young girl's a different matter." "Well, there you go." Stanley interrupted her. "Did you see anything suspicious? Maybe some plumbers or alleged police officers entering the house?" "The maid of honor says there was a Mexican concert." "That's the plan," she said. I already gave the band's contacts to the security guard. We booked the Mexicans a month ago. The girl thought there was a lot more to the program. She almost cried. An illusionist. 2 Hollywood actors with small performances, a couple of world stars. It was a shame that all her work had gone to waste. Although, of course, there were other people involved in the organization. Then maybe the detective held out. Maybe you just want to tell me something. Not necessarily something suspicious, something that would help the investigation. Water nodded her head. I have something to say. Just not here. Let's get away from him. Away from who? The detective was surprised. He nodded expressively towards the room where we were also supposed to assemble our council. Yes, Anash whispered. At this time, the master of the mansion was indeed preparing to hold a meeting. In any unclear situation, he arranged for an extended gathering. So how was the kidnapping of his daughter worse? The mother then called the deputies who were also present at Mr. Rinaldi's wedding. Then he thought about it and decided to go to extreme measures, even calling his own wife. Who did I forget? Matt thought to himself. And at that very second, his expensive phone rang. Mr. Joe, Diego Maradona has arrived, reported the head of security. Where are we taking him? Do you have any idea what happened? Screamed the Mata. Yes, the Tom replied without embarrassment. There were rumors that he died. But that's Maradona. How could he miss your daughter's wedding? Tom shouted, it's my daughter who's missing. Missing? Surprised the head of security. Where to, Mr. Joe? I have no idea. The millionaire roared. My daughter's missing. And you're fired? Go to hell out there. Brandon hated working in such an environment of a huge number of people, but most importantly, the snacks and booze that literally dotted all around. And beautiful girls giving him long, piercing stares. The detective yelled at a good dozen guests of employees, while he managed to pull himself together. He seized on his hard drive, videotapes, photos labeled who and which ones he had been given. At this point, a citywide siege plan was put into effect. Dozens of cops were searching cars, combing train stations and airports. Bullshit. He's investigated a dozen kidnappings in his career. The perps always made the same mistake. They talked too much. They'd leave a trail. Brands, like dogs, all that was left was to get that scent and come up with the intruders. Stanley said excitedly as the detective dialed his partner. I think I got it. I got something. You hear that? Let's talk to that uncle again. Early in his career, Brandon had memorized his own cases in great detail. Even a month or two later, he could recite any case, quote interrogation reports and expert testimony. But gradually the cases became similar to each other. In recent years, it was already difficult for him to recall the details of solved crimes. And of all the kidnappings, he could remember only one, which ended in a major failure. However, his fault in what happened was not at all. The boy's parents were reluctant to go to the police. Brenda started looking for the intruders on the 3rd day of the kidnapping, and all he found was a breathless body. Here, look, said Brandon, setting the tablet in front of Matt and Stanley, who came in 5 minutes later. I took a quick look at the videotapes. So our little girl went missing between 17 UI 1730. Let's just say he got it. He suddenly felt old and also devilishly tired. So what of it? Do you know why I thought that? Asked the detective. Because at 16:45 your daughter was caught in the lens of a girlfriend. They took selfies. That matches the explanation of her march. And around 6:00 p.m., you realize she was missing. Half an hour later, we arrived. What was the next thing the millionaire muttered? You want to brag that you're a little good at your job. Not at all, smiled Brandon. I asked you to come here for a minute for a completely different reason. My question is this: who did the dress? Why did such a question arise in the first place? Angry. It's a completely stupid question. Just the way I like it. We're just wasting time arguing, said the detective. But I was gonna show you anyway. Look, don't you find anything odd? Brandon pressed the space bar and the laptop, started playing the video from the surveillance camera installed behind the guest house. It showed a waiter pushing in front of him the very crate in which the bride's dress had been delivered. At some point, he looked away and the Raven detective pressed stop. The face, of course, was problematic to see, but some features could be caught. Stanley snapped a picture of the screen on his phone and stepped aside to send out an orientation. In a strange coincidence, the other cameras in our hero's path didn't work, said Brandon. I told the interrogator to go all the way to the end. He says there's a fire entrance. It's all covered in sidewalk tile. No footprints. It's hard to tell if someone picked the lock or not. Forensics already took samples. See if there's any trace, but I'm guessing it was this waiter who rolled the crate out. It's all right. Mr. Joe, engrossed in his monologue, he didn't notice his companion turned pale. The millionaire kept staring at the freeze frame. He must have listened to the fiery speech too, absorbed in his own thoughts. No way, Mata whispered, clenching his fists. He felt his head begin to spin, as if the car under his control had flipped over and was flying into the abyss. It can't be. Do you know who that is? Asked Stanley. He was watching the millionaire closely. He was also digesting the information he had received 5 minutes ago from Angie. He would have bellowed this. My girl's in mortal danger, detectives. I bet it was my nephew who cut those. Stanley's been working the last few months. He'd already made up his mind to quit the force. And though he was only 37 years old, he'd had enough. His young children were growing up completely autonomous, communicating with their father by phone and correspondence. His wife threw scandals almost every day. And at work, the big bosses clapped him on the shoulders and asked him to stay on for another year, or better yet, 5 more years. Richard Stanley said the chief of police was hesitant to sign his letter of resignation. You're good, you're damn good. Who needs you but us and your family? Answered the detective. Stanley had already decided for himself that as soon as he found the daughter of this thick-skinned man, he would immediately go on vacation and start looking for a job. And he's not going back to the police station. After all, is it his fault that there are so many crimes going on in this city and so few cops who can investigate them quickly and correctly? And do you like your job? Asked the detective, as they walked down the corridors of the guest house. Yes, smiled the girl. It's the best job on earth. I just can't seem to find a man, or at least a boyfriend at Mr. This, has a bad reputation in that regard. Right this way. She opened the door and gestured for me to come inside. She looked carefully to make sure there were no intruders. It's all right. This is where the mops were put. Buckets here stored sponges and other things needed to put things in order. There was a smell of cleaning supplies in the room that the detective liked very much. 2 days ago, some strange people came to see Mr. This said, when they were alone in a room on the first floor. The room was cramped, and there was nowhere to sit down. If he finds out what I told you, he'll be furious, detective. And he'll definitely fire me. You hear that? Where did you go? Stanley asked. To his house. No, we started with our heads again. They didn't go into the house. He talked to them at the guard post. And then one of the guys told me that Mr. Joe took out a whole wad of money and shoved it in their hands. You think? Asked the detective. Do you think he's hiding something? Yes, definitely. Nodded the girl. He knows more than we do, and Monica didn't want this wedding. She told you that? Stanley was surprised. No, we weren't friends. She used to be very jealous of her father. She even threw a couple of tantrums, said we spent too much time together, even alone. What's that? Laughing. The girl shrugged. He likes his daughters to fight for him, by his own helpers. So what makes you think Monica didn't want a wedding? Stanley asked. She had a lover, answered the girl. I can tell you something if it stays between us. You have my word, nodded Stanley. At my request, the Tom was looking after her, said the girl. Monica was meeting this guy in an apartment in the city. He might know the address. Stanley thought that such an outcome would be most curious. The girl had faked her own kidnapping to get money out of her father. But no, it's too complicated. And it's obviously the wrong day. No, all girls want to get married, even if it's the daughters of millionaires. And this pretty girl is probably just jealous of the girl and wants to make sure she's not found. Is that all? Stanley asked. I think this information will help the progress of the investigation. Can I go now? She asked. I think we've worked something out with the wedding. And I need to get back to him so I can be there for him and do what he says. Suddenly, Arsh approached the detective abruptly, took him by the hem of his jacket, leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips and smiled. You're all right, she said playfully and left the room. Stanley was faced with a different task. Renee was literally bursting with pride in her own person. To accomplish such a thing alone. Of course, he'd had help from his brother Jerome, who'd helped get him a waiter at the lavish wedding and provided him with false papers. He hated the Mata family, so he was happy to mess with them. But could Jerome imagine that his brother would risk such a thing? Cousin Giovanni also supported Reen. It was he who helped to push the heavy box into his van and was now driving to the hiding place. But the rest is a solo composition that Reen performed alone. Out of pleasure and joy, he belted out an old Italian song, and Giovanni immediately backed him up with his powerful voice. Without taking his eyes off the road, Reen asked. He couldn't stand it when other men sang along with him. You and I are carrying a very valuable cargo. What's in there? With a gasp, asked Giovanni. Oh, 45 kilograms of pure gold, smiled Rene. He had a reputation as a joker. Therefore, the cousin wrote what he said with a sense of humor. I hope you know what you're doing, said Giovanni, because I'd hate to go back to prison. Don't worry, pronounced Rene. When you find out what kind of scam I pulled, you'll be over the moon. And your young brother will never give you up. You know I'm tough. Besides not being a joker, we all knew about his strong-willed Italian character. Indeed, if he decided to keep quiet, all the police in the world could not get a word out of him. That's why Giovanni decided to help his brother. Besides, if the cops came after him, he could always play the hoser and pretend that he didn't understand the claims at all. Do you really want to know what's in there? Rene asked suddenly. No, I've changed my mind. Laughter. If suddenly Hawaii catches up with me, and I don't know anything. After a year in jail, Giovanni promised himself and his mother to quit crime. He bought an old bus and started hauling freight. The guy loved to work and was ready to spend 14 o'clock a day behind the wheel, which is not typical for Italians. But alas, after the stray criminal money, his income promised to be better. He could even live behind the wheel of his bus, sleep there, and take any job he wanted. It would still only be enough to make ends meet. Reina had given him $300 for an hour's ride, and the joker clearly had more work to do. If you're really careful, they'll never get caught. Listen, Joe said, keeping his eyes on the road. Maybe you've got a theme in mind. We could play it together and make a big score. But no, brother, said Beggar, pointing to an inconspicuous garage entrance. I'm not into crime. Turning here. You know I have a singing career ahead of me. Soon enough, the whole coast will be talking about me. You'll see and you'll hear. He began to sing another song in his velvet voice. Giovanni envied this young artist. He was really good. And how did he feel about the guitar? Could it be that he had really decided to stick it out to the old folks to get away on stage? And why not? They say that all more or less big American stars used to be backed by the Italian mafia. Together, they gave a guy a gift. They unloaded a large human-sized briefcase and carefully rolled it to the corner of the garage. The guy hugged Giuseppe tightly and gave him a brotherly kiss on both cheeks. The driver wiped a tear that appeared at him from emotion, waved goodbye, and sent. After driving 100 meters away, he jumped out of the cab and returned the real license plates and the stolen ones, on which he had been driving until that moment, he rolled up in a ram's horn and stuck them under the eastern pipe. No dog would ever find them. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Mr. Matta was restless. To think his nephew had cut his way into his wedding and rolled out his personal dress case, most likely with his daughter. There's one question inside, though, that hasn't gone anywhere. How he got her inside. Monica had to fight back. It would have taken a whole gang of kidnappers to break her resistance. How did this young man cut these? Pulled off such a daring plan all by himself? No, whispered it while pouring whiskey into a huge glass. No, he has accomplices. I will find them. I will find them. And I will make them talk. Whatever it takes. Now, Mr. Rinaldi, Stanley said, looking at the groom's father. Take a good look at this picture. Do you recognize anyone? The detective showed him the image taken from Brendan's laptop. The detective looked at the screen and sighed. I told you, I spoke out of anger, Rinaldi whispered. Let's hire professionals. Let's spend it on security. Let's not waste any time. Stanley asked Monica. It was probably kidnapped. That's for sure, said Rinaldi. If it's a detective case, I'll recognize the valise. It's always carried the dress for our princess. Tell me more about it, Stanley asked. It's quite an expensive dress, explained the groom's father. It requires a special humidity and temperature. This case maintains it. Well, it's kind of like a refrigerator. Could it fit a person inside? I think so, said Rinaldi. Especially if it's a hidden girl. Can the temperature be regulated? Asked Stanley. Of course, nodded the father of the groom, and the humidity. The detective scratched his chin thoughtfully. In another situation, he would have assumed that Rinaldi was involved in the kidnapping, but he had absolutely no motive to commit this crime. Now he and his failed brother-in-law were on display. Let me ask you a personal question, Stanley said. Suppose I'm a kidnapper and I want to put up a ransom for Matt's daughter. How much should I ask for? Between you and me, he's not doing well, Rinaldi said. He's rich in assets, but you can't pull a lot of money out of them overnight. I don't think he can do more than 10 million. Who do you think would want to kidnap the girl? The detective asked. I have no idea. Rinaldi shrugged. One thing I can say for sure, if he didn't think he was smarter than all of us put together, it wouldn't have happened. Anger, longing overwhelmed his soul. Rinaldi didn't feel sorry for the 1 million he'd spent on the wedding, and even the gorgeous dress for Monica, which she clearly didn't deserve. He didn't care at all. Reputation was another matter. Unless this trickster could figure out how to get out of the situation, he needed to be distanced from him immediately. Rinaldi couldn't believe that such a thing was possible in modern America. It seemed that the era of the relationship between Italians was in the distant past. Even his father was no more than a respectable American, much less his son. James held his own in this situation. He was, of course, discouraged by the news that his fiancée had been kidnapped, but he kept his spirits up. Detective, Rinaldi asked, let me ask you a question. What are the chances of finding our beauty alive? And of course, well, it usually takes up to 3 days to solve a kidnapping, Stanley explained. The next limit is a week. If the person is not found within that period, the chances of rescue are close to 0. But pardon me, Rinaldi said. You said but. Yes, nodded the detective. If we're talking about classic kidnappings. But there is a nuance. Nipro claims within 24 hours or immediately after the crime. And here there's silence. It's strange. Looking at the general merriment, it brought tears to my eyes. Annoyed, he walked out into the crowd. After a short meeting with his aides and wife, he had made his decision, and yet he was terribly reluctant to announce it. As much as Mr. Joni would delay this moment, action must be taken. The musicians stopped playing music, all eyes fixed on him. The master of the house. Taking the microphone from the host's hands, he exhaled loudly and said, Dear guests, my favorite close and dear people. Unfortunately, Trouble has come to this house instead of a wedding. A murmur ran through the courtyard. Not only the guests, but also the waiters were talking. An impressionable woman fainted and her clumsy husband accidentally broke an expensive champagne flute. "My daughter, Monica," Nestor whispered. That disappeared for nothing, with no explanation. "The police are already working here at the mansion. If any of you are asked any questions, please do not refuse to answer them. Maybe it'll save my little girl's life." Yes, God bless you all. The homeowner's words had the effect of a bomb going off. Dozens of people immediately rushed to the exit. She used to try to sift out the most high-status and expensive guests to take them out separately. She darted through the crowd, which was becoming less and less organized. Some stepped aside to let the flow past them. The lyricist triumphed, though, getting new information on her phone. What started out as a dreary wedding of millionaires risked turning into a posh report into the story of the 100th anniversary. Basically, she didn't care about Monica's fate if she was raped or killed. It would only spice things up. Of course, such things couldn't be said out loud. But no one forbade her to think a red-hot thought. This story would help her climb to the top of the journalistic Olympus. Getting a foothold in the profession, human reaction helped her. She instantly turned on the photo and video cameras on her phone, instantly typed out the news. Right now, her journalistic flair and a little hint helped her make the only right decision. Going to the party disguised as a photographer. She had taken wonderful shots and with complete impunity. Now she had to make the right choice. Most likely, it would be better to hide in the mansion, to hide and listen and see if she could record anything. She'd spotted the cops with her battered eyes earlier. Both Brandon and Stanley were familiar to her. Now the landlord had to talk to the guests again, but this time to receive from them endless wishes of support and offers of help. Powerless and devastated, we shook each hand and endured it, each touch on their own shoulder. The very last man in this mournful procession was the father of the groom. But no words of encouragement were heard from him by Mr. Joe. "If security in this house is so low," Mr. Rinaldi said, "when there's no one else around, should we think of uniting our capitals?" "What are you talking about?" Matt Swees wore on a powerful rebuke. He had no more left. "I'm doing everything in my power to find Monica. You're under the impression that she may have faked her own kidnapping," says the estranged relative. He said she wasn't sure how she felt. "How dare he?" Mr. Mata shouted. "My daughter is the cleverest and most beautiful girl. She adores her father, and she adores you too. She wouldn't talk such nonsense. I told him the same thing," Rinaldi replied. But the smile on his face didn't please Mr. Joe. "Did you also tell the kid what it means to lock in a loss? To lock in a loss?" The millionaire questioned Mr. Joe, although he was well aware of such a word combination. How to fix it? "Yes, yes." Rinaldi nodded. There was no longer that ingratiating tone in him. It was more confident. "Kid. Unlike us, Mr. Joe never went through bankruptcy. That empty feeling when you realize you're left with nothing. But you and I have been through it. Monica's probably his first major loss. I explained to the kid that he needs to get over it." Listen to Rinaldi. Mr. Mata grabbed his visor by the jacket. "We'll find her tomorrow. The day after tomorrow at the latest, and we'll play the Dan wedding. We'll build the whole coast with your skyscrapers. Do you hear, Giuseppe?" Rinaldi said softly, pulling away. "I said fixing the losses with my little boy. He has fully accepted our updated strategy. Together we are going to discover new markets. Nothing personal, just business. Of course, with your abilities, we could accomplish a lot, as could you with our hands. But there is providence, and there is the voice of God. On the coast." That's what our wedding whispered. "The coast is not the end of the world." In a conciliatory tone, said the construction magnate, "We can do anything. I've long been ready to switch to building subways or social housing in Mexico, or building individual bomb shelters. I hear there's a huge demand for them now, like during the Cold War. Do you really think I'm doing all this to grow my empire? Didn't you?" The master of the house was surprised. "Not at all. Rinaldi replied, I only wanted my boy Vasco to be happy. Bless you, Giuseppe. I'm sure your daughter will return. I'm sure you can get her married. Profitable. But another time, perhaps we should ask her consent. The millionaire was completely overwhelmed. The guests, who only a few hours ago were ready to drink and eat from his hands, were leaving the mansion. Along with them, his soul was filling up, a vague sense of unease. The last time he defended it was in 2008, hours before the mortgage default kicked in. Fortunately, he was able to survive that crisis with an extremely broad portfolio of investments. Why did that pinching sense of dread overtake his soul? Now, sitting in the closet was uncomfortable. River was glad he hadn't been tempted to try all those dozens of wines and other beverages the tables at the ceremony were bursting with. Once inside the guest house, she chose the right room and decided to hide there. Finding it wasn't easy, but the landmarks helped. 20 minutes later, she heard a familiar voice. She did. The detectives and I were discussing her daughter's disappearance. Rika surreptitiously turned on the recorder and prepared to listen. One last conversation, and we'll leave you to it, Stanley said. You see, we can't escape the feeling that there's another factor. Did Brandon help him, which you're either hiding from us or deeming irrelevant? I told you where to find her. The Mata roared. Don't you see who's making my whole life go to hell? We can't break into Mister's house, Stanley said calmly, even if his nephew was here, even if he stole the dress case. Besides, Rinaldi had made no claim to the thing. Moreover, Brenton said, it might well have been a distraction. But you must agree, who would draw so much attention to themselves by stealing such a huge structure? It appeared on his forehead again. Those cheeks had already figured out everything, right down to who the ill-fated briefcase belonged to. They'd be looking for his daughter at the same rate. He hated it when anyone taught him how to work, though. Who knows if the esteemed cop is as sentimental about these matters as he is. Let's try to remember, said Detective Stanley in his calm voice. Was there anything strange on the day your daughter went missing or in the days before? Strange. Pulled. There was. Some old woman came by today. Brandon was surprised. What's so strange about it? She talked, said she had some information for me, and she asked for help, said to come down. What did she say? Asked the detective. I have no idea. The millionaire shrugged. I told her to get her out of here. You didn't remember the name, of course, the cop said. Why not? It was desperate for praise, as in the old days, when his every silly joke was met with thunderous laughter. I keep hundreds of names and numbers in my head. Detective. So name it. The name that was just rolling around on my tongue slipped away. The millionaire started snapping his fingers, as if trying to catch the words by their tails. Oh shit. What was his name? I've heard that name before. Disappointed detective tired of waiting for the resurrection in the memory of the cherished last name, and was about to leave the room with his colleague. But in the doorway, Wyatt was called out to them both. Remembered. Excitedly whispered the millionaire. Her name was Mira for the line. That's how she introduced herself when we spoke on the phone, and Anish dialed me. That was at about 4:30 p.m. Gentlemen. You see, I'm not that old yet. That's for sure. Brandon asked, scratching his chin. You're not confusing anything. No, Angry answered we are. I told you, I have an excellent memory. You wanted details. I remembered them. The thing is, said Brandon, I know this woman, or rather these details. Well, then dig, Inspector Dig. Mr. Joe yelled, dig in that direction. Mr. Mehta, tell me honestly, are you kidding me? The journalist became suspicious. The names and surnames spoken up to that point said nothing. But when she heard the Pasolini Prize, the journalist perked up. Could she be the one? Taking out Rick's iPhone, she began to write a short note Tuck sketched. If suddenly now her hunch was confirmed, no need to demand so much from fate. Luck, of course, loves preparation, but also restraint and modesty, The very qualities that Rika could never boast of. The telephone, a journalist's main weapon, thought Rika, trying to stretch her legs. Everything here has cameras to take cool pictures, a notepad to quickly jot down a note. And then there's the internet, where you can always get the information you need. If I didn't know your boss, roared the Mat, I'd call you a puppy, for no one here. No one is allowed to say in my house that I'm bullying. If you're not bullying, that's even worse. The detective hissed. Brendan held back, but with great difficulty. To gain access to Signora, the ruin, you really had to dig. In the truest sense of the word. All because her funeral had taken place 3 weeks ago. Grandma passed away, quietly and peacefully. What can't be said for the valuables that were stored in her vintage apartment? While the old lady waited for her own nameless body to be discovered, someone took everything they could get their hands on. Brandon was on duty when the call came in. This was way out of his league and out of his specialty. After all, burglaries can be handled by rookie cops. They could be investigated by investigators with good agency or serious leads. The brand had a non-trivial reason for such a case. One of the items stolen from the old lady was a real heirloom. You see, Mr. Mehta, said the detective, I don't believe in coincidences, and there are so many in this case, it's sickening. Do you know who Measure is? Of course not. The millionaire waved his hand. I just remembered the name. And that was the name of the grandmother who wanted to see me this morning. What's the matter? You don't see. The world's behind the lines. Passed away some time ago. The old lady was well-to-do, explained the detective. She owned Martha Washington's ring. Quite officially. What's the matter? Are you sick? No. The answer is, Mister, it's paler. I'm fine. These worries are about my daughter and more. So talk to this poor collector. You see, Martha Washington's ring is a real heirloom, said Brandon. Oh, come on, I'm sorry. We're just wasting time. We got work to do. Let's go to the walls. No. Tell me, the millionaire asked. I'm very curious. What's the deal with this ill-fated ring? All right, it won't take long anyway. Brandon waved his hand. That ring is worth an insane amount of money. The entire state police are focused on finding it. Shortly before the mayor's death, the line was going to donate it to the National Museum. It was a long negotiation, but alas, and what are the penalties for a man who stole such a ring? We asked in as calm a voice as possible. I don't know. Probably, shrugged Brandon. I think that the kidnappers simply do not realize what treasure has fallen into his dirty clutches. You see, a trinket like that might be worth 1,010,000 or 20. Yeah, you could get killed for something like that. Mister, this is bad for you. The millionaire collapsed on the floor. Stanley, who had hitherto remained silent, ran up to the millionaire and grabbed him by the shoulders. Took his pulse. Everything was normal. The cops looked at each other. Mr. Jones sat up, rubbing his temples. We need to talk, Mata whispered. No time to talk to my lawyer, Brandon said gruffly. This is your daughter's life we're talking about. If you have something to say, spit it out right now. I saw that ring, said the millionaire. He was terrified that he had brought his daughter to the brink of death himself. Had you seen it? Surprised Detective Brandon. When I bought that ring, Mata whispered. You did, but I had no idea it was stolen. No idea. Then why did you buy it? Asked the cop. Don't you understand? The millionaire waved his hand. If you, like me and my parents, had been in the skin of a migrant, when I got my American passport, I swore that I would never leave this country and I would never cede it to anyone. And the ring of the wife of the first president, Hugo. Stanley smiled. And those, shall we say, antique lovers knew what they were selling you. Yes, they did. Shrugged Mata's shoulders. Oh, shit. I'm the one who told them I was going to give my daughter a gift for her daughter. The detectives looked at each other. Stanley pulled out his phone and started frantically typing something into Messenger. Brandon froze like a dog. He turned his head left and right. Then he signaled his coworker to freeze. Quietly, slowly, Brandon walked over to the new closet, swung it open. "What a meeting," the girl said, looking at the millionaire. "Glad to meet you. And here I am, hiding from my employer's prying eyes. Who the hell are you?" He roared as he approached her. "I'll throw you out the window." "Don't touch her, Mr. Joe," Stanley warned, grabbing the landlord by the arm. "She's a journalist. Worked for a millionaire. But give me the phone." "Late is late," smiled the girl, showing her iPhone. "Too late, because I already sent the memo. God bless America." This time, Mr. John didn't collapse to the floor, but his face became so pale you could see the patterns of blood vessels on it. America only smiled as she watched him suffer. She loved to watch the masters of life suffer. Brandon hated the press, but he was the one who had been sent in front of the press, and he didn't dare disobey orders. You have to be careful when talking to the media, even if you're leaving the force, and even more careful if you want to stay on the force. Just one wrong word, one joke, and the newspapermen will instantly hoist your detective soul on their free speech pitchforks. "Dear colleagues," said Brandon, "I am invited to make a brief statement. The police are investigating Monica's disappearance. This means a criminal trial. A huge amount of evidence has been analyzed. The department is prepared to pay a reward to anyone who has information of value to us." "Did the kidnappers make demands?" the young journalist asked. She did not identify herself. "No demands," the detective replied. "No reliable information about the details of the kidnapping." "If not a kidnapping, then what is it?" asked the Tolstoy newspaperman, twitching all his chin. "No comment," replied Brandon. He loved that word combination. "Let's say I'm a kidnapper," the young journalist said thoughtfully. "What could I expect? For leniency if you give up the police and fulfill all its requirements," said the detective with a smile. What was happening was beginning to irritate him. "More questions, Mr. Brandon." He heard a familiar voice. "Rika Smith, special correspondent. Do you confirm that there was also a theft of the national relic of Martha Washington's ring?" "I do." Brandon nodded. "But there's no need to sensationalize it. That ring was stolen 3 weeks ago. I personally put the card in the system of search for valuables. Its cultural status is also unconfirmed, since it hasn't been examined by an expert. The rest is just coincidence and your speculation." The detective immediately invited language, but it was too late. The reporters became animated, like an alligator that had been thrown a piece of meat. He saw the newspapermen rush to their gadgets to scribble notes. Not only was a millionaire's daughter missing, but also a very valuable gizmo. Was Mr. Matta involved in the disappearance of this ring? Rika asked. "In the interest of the investigation, this information is confidential," answered Brandon, although he would love to answer the omnipresent journalist indecently. "If you know where the ring is or Monica, let me know," smiled the detective. That phrase was superfluous too. "Mr. Brent, how much could such a ring be worth?" Another reporter blurted out, and the detective decided to take the opportunity to escape. 1000000. "If it's real," he answered. "The press conference is over. God bless America and give us all strength." At this time, Mr. This was reading an article about himself, instantly covered in sweat. This journalist had, in fact, still a child completely buried in the ground. Not even the top of his head is sticking out. His daughter's kidnapping had taken a back seat. Turns out all of America is now talking about the millionaire who stole George Washington's ring. Angry comments flooded the newswires. Columnists exercised wit, trying to find ever more caustic language to label his failure. "Gagliano." Mr. whispered it into the phone. "Do I need you urgently?" "I'm on my way." "Encourage," replied the interlocutor. Gagliano could smell money a mile away. Not every lawyer has that kind of nose. And not everyone knows how to interpret signals correctly. Today, when he first heard that the scandal Gagliano, and immediately canceled all business meetings, postponed them for a week ahead. He went to a restaurant near Mr. Matt's residence and waited for the call. When the driver took him to the mansion, the lawyer asked him to stop at a newsstand. So he bought a fresh press, sat in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce, and began flipping through the pages. Galliano loved the smell of freshly printed newspapers. It took him back to his childhood, when he himself sold the same publications on the streets of New York for $2 a day. That's all in the past now, but the smell of fresh press still lifted his spirits. On the front page, these pages of which were to be adorned with a picture of Joe's daughter in a gorgeous dress, modeled the headline Millionaire. Tommen, how has the gentleman encroached upon the history of the states? Gagliano read the entire article and noted to himself that there was nothing to latch onto. The entire piece was built on innocent questions and official police reports. The first ring had indeed been stolen. Second, Mr. confirmed this, that the relic passed through his hairy hands. About the excessive vegetation, it's completely true. All mature Italians suffer from it. A millionaire's third daughter is missing, and he gave her rings the day before. As they say, draw your own conclusions. The only thing that caught the eye of an experienced lawyer is the word clip ataman. Galliani knew perfectly well medical diagnoses on the pages of the press cannot be published. And yet this is not enough to nail him and make him apologize. What to say about the small news sites that reprinted the news without looking into the details? It seems that by evening all America knew that it had something to do with the disappearance of some national relic, but the public didn't want to understand the rest of the details. They wanted the hot facts. The lawyer walked through the beautiful courtyard with the traces of the failed wedding. The staff of the entertainment agency was dismantling scenes, unfolding tables, assembling chairs. Guards like soldiers covered every entrance and exit to Mr. This mansion and his guest house. Gagliano nodded to one of them, whose face seemed familiar. But he didn't even see a smile in return. What caught his eye was the automatic pistol that was loaded, placed in a holster. Not one that was prepared for defense. A pass was demanded by the guard. "Gentlemen, this is waiting for me," explained the lawyer, showing his card. "Say Galliano is in place. Expect," ordered the guard and ran to his patron. That one will always be so strict now, Galliani thought, looking around. The guards were giving him unkind looks, and when one of the staff dismantled the scene, approached the mansion, almost beat him. "Where are you going?" angrily asked the hot young man. "Why are you stinking around here?" "I was looking for the restroom," the employee whispered. "What's this? A wedding or a funeral?" Rodriguez shouted. The security guard kicked the underachiever out and blacklisted him. "But I didn't do anything," screamed the hapless entertainment employee. "Let me pack my bags." "You'll get it in the mail," Rodriguez replied. "You're right. The right living his main entrance. Walk faster, or else I'll give you the acceleration now." Galliani, who had been in this hospitable house at the best of times, did not cease to be amazed. First of all, he could not believe that Giuseppe had enemies capable of stealing his daughter. For God's sake, this is America. Here any questions can be settled in court. Secondly, Galliano had never noticed such a huge number of guards. With his experienced eye, he counted 15 men. "Who are you defending yourself against?" "Mr. Galliani," the first guard called out to him, returning from a patron. "Mr. Joe is waiting for you in the library on the second floor. He said you find your own way." "Absolutely." The lawyer nodded and walked past the armed guys. The peaceful man. He hated it when they tried to settle things with guns. The tables inside the house had not yet been dismantled. They were still filled with snacks and drinks, and Galliano couldn't resist a cookie with black caviar. A compact refrigerator and a closet was set up for the treat. The lawyer only had to lift the lid and put the delicacy with a silver spoon. He loved to eat deliciously. Therefore, so many culinary masterpieces made his eyes go wild. Even a sandwich. He went up to the second floor and saw the master of the house. The gentleman was hard to look at. This large, strong man was literally hustling. Bags appeared under his eyes. He was also wiping the sweat from his forehead. Gagliano came up to him and shook his hand warmly. And then they embraced. "I'm sorry, friend," said we. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you to my daughter's wedding." "It's nothing." The lawyer waved his hand. "I think you had enough troubles not to old friends. Besides, I was supposed to have an important meeting tonight, but I canceled it." "I'm in trouble," said the millionaire. Like I didn't hear him. "You must have heard my daughter's missing, right?" "Of course I did," nodded Galliani. "I wanted to tell you right away that all negotiations should be conducted by the police. Alas, it is more difficult to negotiate with criminals than with the most rusty gambler." "No calls yet." Mata sighed. "I called you for another matter. They can't make a formal charge." The lawyer nodded. He was all too aware of the consequences if the story of this ancient ring did get spun. "We could have this arrested, and not for a token 6 months, but for a considerable period of time. This story with Washington's ring is a nightmare." Galliani said, "Did you do the right thing to call me? You could go to jail for stealing something like that. Certainly a man with Italian roots. But I didn't know." Screaming Giuseppe, "Damn it. There have been so many presidents in the history of this glorious country. How do I know some ring was stolen?" "Take it easy." Joe calmed down. It was Gagliano's lawyer whispering, "I've pulled you out of the sludge before. And this time, I'm asking you to keep your voice down." "That's it," said Joe, lowering his voice 2 times, even quieter. The lawyer asked. Through his channels, he learned that a journalist had infiltrated the house to this, under the guise of a waitress. Of course, letting so many people into his mansion was a huge risk. If he had consulted Galliani, he would have said, "The wedding should be celebrated anywhere but here, away from home." Now he had to be careful. What if another left-wing journalist overheard them? "That's it," whispered the millionaire. "Yes," agreed Galliano perfectly. "Tell me, have you been questioned?" "No," answered it. "There was a conversation with the detective, that's all. The same conversation that this journalist overheard. You see, you have to give a proper statement, don't you?" The lawyer advised me. "Say you were looking for a present for your daughter, and some adventurer offered you Martha Washington's ring, and you bought it out of pure humor for the sake of a joke, thinking that you are acquiring some kind of everywhere face, not a relic. How much did you pay?" 100,000, answered were 100 grand. Galliani shouted, "Oh shit. No, it doesn't work like that. You paid a tenner to a tenner. Got it? Okay." The millionaire nodded. "The main thing is not to forget. Do you think I'll go to jail? If you listen to me, no." The lawyer shrugged. "When you're called in for questioning." "Tomorrow, 2:00 p.m., said we'll go together." "You ask." Gigliano chuckled. "Now you can't even pee without your lawyer. Eh? There's a way to get you out of this, even make you a hero." "How?" asked Matt. He was willing to pay a lot more than the fabulously expensive services of Gagliano to find the ring. The lawyer shrugged. "Do you think that these underachievers can really find your daughter? All rich people are the same," Brandon thought. 2:00 didn't pass before the millionaire called an incredibly expensive lawyer to pretend to solve his issues. And now this parasite from the legal world was calling his detective's personal cell phone. How did he get the number? Of course, a man like that would have to be talked to. Like it or not, there was little desire to do so. Mr. Brandon said with a smile to Galliani, starting into the video call, "I apologize for the distraction. My client and I would like to assist the investigation." "I'm listening." The detective answered only quickly and to the point. "We're still looking for Monica." That's what Mr. Joy wanted to say a few words about. The lawyer smiled. He turned the cameras on the millionaire. "Mister, it's like he's gotten older, hustling." "Detective." Brandon grinned gloatingly to himself. "The rich cry too. No, they cry when it becomes obvious that money can't buy something. Like going back in time and righting wrongs." The detective said it, but his voice sounded rusty. "Martha Washington's ring Or rather, allegedly Martha's ring. Allegedly Martha. Alleged ring. Stop wasting my time. Brandon exploded. We're not talking off the record here. Anyway, it's a goddamn ring. 2 guys brought it to me, said the millionaire. Tom, the former head of security, set me up with them. I fired him today. Brandon's used to his clients not telling him the truth. But when it comes to his daughter, maybe if he'd gotten this information a few hours ago, they'd have moved forward with the investigation by now. Brand sighed and set his tongues, singing indignation within himself. Already he had said something. What were their names? I really don't know these people's names, Matta said. Real names. We've got to remember something. Brendan exhorted him. They probably know the fate of the ring and your daughter. I saw them for the first time, replied the millionaire. He didn't write the volume. He said that some people wanted to sell me something worthwhile. I don't know why I agreed to this stupid meeting. It wasn't really like that. The head of security told me that a real relic of Martha Washington's ring had surfaced on the black market, and Mr. Matt himself was begging for a meeting to sell it. It seemed to him that if his daughter wore such a ring, not a single person in the whole country would dare to challenge his status as a U.S. citizen. One of them was named Rick, pronounced, "We are Thin Rick." Brandon shrieked. He couldn't hide his excitement. Did you guys really mess with Thin Rick? The detective found it increasingly difficult to refrain from the very unprintable expressions for which his department was famous. Think thin. That man wouldn't miss an opportunity to make a big score, and if we also showed him the money. I can see why the kidnappers didn't make any demands. They could wait days, playing a subtle game with a millionaire. That's all. Brandon asked. Or are there any other juicy details? That's it. Exhaled the millionaire. Please find my daughter. The lawyer turned the camera back to his pretty face. The detective noted to himself that this man didn't care about other people's suffering. He hadn't even changed his face when he'd asked him to find his daughter. And Thin Rick's name didn't make any impression on him. This will make the officer's investigation easier, won't it? Asked Gagliano. Of course, answered Brandon. I'll report everything to the prosecutor. Over and out. Gagliano said he would stay at Matt's mansion as long as necessary. The millionaire thanked for his concern, although he did not believe in its sincerity. However, the presence of an old acquaintance was very useful. Mr. Joe now could not relax for a second and was waiting for new blows. Leaving aside the Italian wine, the maitre d' ordered to serve him a bottle of whiskey. He began to consume this drink to recover a little, and at the same time to calculate the losses. So, the wedding of his daughter did not take place. So we can forget about reaching new financial frontiers. Convert the influence in square kilometers of offices and residential apartments will not work. Speaking of influence, after a series of scathing articles, Mr. Matta will be shunned like a leper. He's seen it here in the West. They called it ostracism, a culture, an abolitionist culture. Luckily for him, he doesn't have to get movie roles or seek contact with the crowd. So he can just leave managerial positions formally and go into the shadows, and from there he can keep pulling strings. Finally, the most important attack is the risk of ending up behind bars. We've been kicking ourselves for telling detectives about the ring without consulting Gagliano. There was no doubt that the whole thing was played by professionals. First, they forced him to buy the ring, taking advantage of his provincial complexes. Then they sent some actress disguised as an old lady. They set it up so he'd kick her out, but he'd remember her name. And then they stole his daughter. The problem is, he's Giuseppe. It's still at the mercy of unknown intruders. For now, he remains a piece on the chessboard. They continue their game and will soon want the prize money. 1,010,000 at least. That's when he'll show them what Italian integrity is all about. He'll agree to any demands, find the money. And then the wheels will turn. Not a single person will be able to avoid answering what he will do with them. Oh, at this time, a gentleman who was far inferior to us in terms of volume and capital structure was drinking whiskey on the same occasion, But unlike Mr. Joe, he was celebrating success, not counting his losses. In just 2 moves, not just to humiliate his opponent, but to destroy him. Of course, not everything went exactly as the calculating Italian had planned. Some points had to be adjusted on the fly. But revenge, the very dish that should be served cold, turned out to be really juicy. Reading the newspaper headlines and angry comments, Cutthese reveled in their victory. The only question that kept him on his toes was, where had the girl gone? He had actually thought about her kidnapping, had kept the possibility in his mind all along, and had even embedded his own man in the entourage. However, there's no way for those fools to prove anything. Therefore, Mr. Elizabeth only had to sing along with whiskey, eat pickled olives and laugh, rejoicing in his brilliant plan. He'll find the girl. As long as someone who plays his own game doesn't interfere in this story. The clock struck 12. Stanley and Brendan continued to sit in the office, analyzing the information. The kidnapping required total concentration as the clock ticked down. In such moments of peak time, one descends to the bottom of Maslow's pyramid of needs. After a week of work at the reel, Stanley was ready to sell his soul for a hot shower and a bed with fresh linen. That's the reason he's quitting. And Brandon seemed to be able to endure any hardship, not a man but a machine. He held a complex dialogue with 3 informants at once. This job was like a chess game with several opponents at the same time, and Brenton was nearing the endgame, moving into the endgame. He's about to checkmate and checkmate at the same time. "Bingo!" shouted the detective. "I found her." "Who?" Stanley was surprised. "Our girl," answered Brandon. "But it's gonna cost me a lot of money." "Oh well. Let's get in the transport. We're gonna get her." "Just the 2 of us?" Stanley asked. "Are you crazy? Let's call in a SWAT team for force support." "I've got 2 flak jackets in the trunk," Brandon shrugged. "And a shotgun. You can take the helmet if you want." "I'm not going anywhere," Stanley cut him off. "I've already dropped a support request from mine." Brandon smiled. "Or I'll go alone." With those words, he slipped his jacket over his shoulders and rushed out the door. Stanley cursed, put his hat on his head, and ran after him. Brandon, in spite of his stature, was moving very righteously. Stanley rushed after him on his long legs, cursing his partner. "Where'd you get the information?" he asked. "And what's the rush?" "From an informant," answered Brandon. "We got about 20 minutes, no more." The detectives drove through the night city, both the Buick and Brendan literally swallowing up the kilometers. He was accelerating at an obscene speed, and Stanley prayed they didn't hit some pole or manhole. "Where are we going?" Stanley asked. "Let's go easy on the warehouses," Brendan replied. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed his partner patting his pockets. "Did you forget your cell phone?" "Uh-huh," Stanley nodded. "Oh, shit. This is all your fault." "While we were running down the stairs, I dropped the boss," Brandon replied. "Didn't you get Churko off in time?" Stanley was silent. They drove into some kind of industrial development. In the dark, the detective couldn't recognize the place anyway. Brandon turned off the engine. Quietly, without slamming the doors, they walked to the trunk. Brand handed him the body armor helmet and picked up the shotgun himself. "Tell me honestly," Stan said, "what's your deal with the river?" "What?" The detective snapped at him. "Did we come here for the girl or what?" Brandon answered, smiling slyly at the girl. "We're after Warehouse 48. That's what the informant said." Out of the corner of his eye, Brandon saw Stanley slam himself back into his pocket to get his cell phone. The detective smiled. "That's how it is. You live with a man for years, and he's a two-faced rat, ready to sell you out for 30 dimes, or something even cheaper. Didn't you tell the river where we were going to torture our millionaire?" Brandon continued, filling the shotgun with ammo. "She would never have guessed it herself." "Go to hell," said Stanley. "I didn't do anything, and you hid my phone." "I didn't." "No." Brandon smiled, adjusting his armor, which barely fit his large belly. Just put it in a drawer so you forget it. And now what? Stanley asked. You gonna turn me in? No, worse, said his partner. We find the girl. I'll file a report and go back to your corrupt journalists. He jerked the bolt spectacularly, putting a cartridge in the snick, though the movement was unnecessary. Brandon already knew he wouldn't have to shoot, but he wanted to impress Stanley and show what a beautiful world he was losing. Real male friendship instead of fried facts, instead of stray coins. Something more expensive, a sense of mutual support and respect. Follow me, Brandon ordered, turning on the flashlight on his shotgun. Together, they stole from around the underground level. Warehouse 48 wasn't hard to find. There was a strip of light shining out from under the door, and someone was playing music inside. Perfect place to rehearse. There was no one around at this time of day. The nearest apartment buildings were miles away. As he got closer and closer to the cherished warehouse, Brandon began to worry that the informant had deceived him. He could hear the gentle strumming of guitars and charming duets of male and female voices. Stanley fell behind. What a rat thought Brendan hadn't even left yet, and already he was starting to care so much about his own ass. The detective crept to the steel door and slipped his finger in the gap between them for a word push and stepped back. The door began to open slowly, as if a gust of wind had propelled it. The voices died down. Brandon heard footsteps from deep inside the warehouse. Someone was coming to close the door. It made sense, and as the man's hand moved out in search of the handle, the detective nimbly grabbed it, twisted, and pulled it toward him. Handcuffs. Stan shouted. Brendan, Stan, handcuffs. Dan you to hell. The clock read 8. Tough morning. Up in bed as early as yesterday. At this time, Mr. Mata thought he was the ruler of the world. He made plans. He was going to grow his capital to obscene levels, and today he's sitting in his underwear on a silk sheet, trying to grasp the shadow of the passing day. So first, let's count the losses. George Rossi called their longtime friendship a mistake and asked not to bother him again. Charles Bianchi publicly disavowed the awarding of a multi-million-dollar contract. Giovanni Greca called to apologize and for a long 5 minutes told why this conversation would be the last. Luca Moretti ordered a column in 5 leading media outlets on the coast to angrily denounce his former business partner. So it is in all mortal sins, but he had a less than pleasant conversation with Mr. Rinaldi yesterday. Add to that a dozen other, not financial sharks, but a little smaller fish, which yesterday rushed away from him. Yeah, it's time to declare bankruptcy. No, he's got some savings. Enough to live comfortably, enough to travel. He'll have to keep 2 or 3 of the security detail down to the secretary. It's a girl with a funny name of Alex. He liked it, just as long as she doesn't go telling the media about harassment right now. No, she's not. But his biggest loss was Monica, his daughter, his greatest treasure, still out of reach. What if the mysterious kidnappers found out what relic he gave her and thought the ransom was a lie? Or now they're going to try to screw him over for a sum he doesn't have. There was another possibility. Let the minuscule that the daughter was found just shy of calling early in the morning or did not want to tell the terrible news. Mr. Id remembered that Detective Brenton left his phone and urged to call almost any time of day or night. Well, 800 hours is the legal time to call. He dialed the number, and the cop picked up the phone the second he did. Did you find my daughter? No preamble, asked Mr. Matt. In just one day he had lost so much of what he held dear. Yes, answered Brandon, briefly. Found. Then why did Mr. Mitta whisper? Why didn't you call? At 200 hours, you showed up for questioning. The detective was lazy. That's when you'll find out. She's alive, the millionaire asked fearfully. Fortunately, yes, replied the detective. No more comments on the phone. The receiver beeped, and the connection was cut off. It threw the expensive phone into the wall in a rage. The iPhone bounced on the parquet and like a frog jumped several times. The screen was covered with a network of cracks. shouted he, and to me ran. When the frightened girl ran into the bedroom, he said, "Call that rascal, call him right now. Wait a minute. Call him in a few minutes. Come here, darling, I've got something to do." "I'm listening." Says, "Mister, if I find out it was you who hissed, that's if I find out it was me." Calmly replied my nemesis I. Who else was ever going to hear someone? "If I called you, don't play games with me. You kidnapped my daughter." The millionaire stretched angrily. "You planted that ring on me, but you're like a child. I'm not going to talk to you on the phone. Unlike you, Joe, I know all too well the kind of cells that chatty businessmen go to. If I find out you're the one who whispered it, that you set this whole thing up, oh my God, you really don't know anything." I was surprised. "No," Joe answered, completely confused. "And about my nephew, too?" Asked his date. "No, but then quickly go to the main entrance of your pseudo-American mansion. Come on, let's go before it's too late." And hung up. We thought it would be very Italian to shoot him when he's alone and unprotected in such an open place. But he wasn't afraid of death anymore. Why would he want a world without his daughter? And the capital that made a descendant of immigrants with a family name. That's Mr. He staggered across the courtyard of his mansion. The place hadn't been cleaned up after last night's wedding invasion. There were napkins, plastic bottles, leftover dishes, and engraved spoons lying around. The jam he'd ordered the day before. The guards looked away and pretended to be extremely busy bums. And so he reached the main entrance to his estate, swung open the entry gate, spread his arms out to shout, "Shoot. Well, already I'm all yours." But there was no minibus, not even a scooter where a machine gunner could sit. Only on the grass in front of the gate lay a small box. He picked it up and put it in his pocket, though it might well have been a bomb. He walked back into the house, sat down on the sofa, and opened it. In the box was his daughter's ring, or rather Martha's ring to Washington, and a small letter. The millionaire unfolded it and read it aloud. "And no one kidnapped me. I'm fine. And I'm happy. P.S. Go to hell, bye."
Subscribe and click the bell.
A university in a large regional center was considered young, so it did not have the same prestige as, say, a pedagogical one. The university had its own professors, library, and published scientific works. And at the university, the first graduating class of students was prepared to work at the university. From this graduating class, the most significant careers were made by two of them. David became rector and Jacob became a professor. He lectured and was adored by the students. David and Jacob had once been friends, but long ago their paths parted. David was married and raising children. He looked older than his years and was constantly overloaded with things to do. His many responsibilities at the university and at home left him no free time. Looking at David, you would never say that he held a prominent position, a short man of slim build. He'd been wearing a suit for 20 years. His wife could hardly persuade him to wear one she'd buy or knit for him. But David was in love with science. His university, when he talked about its development or transformation, his eyes began to burn with a fanatical gleam if it became clear the man was in his place. Perhaps Jacob was hurt by the fact that he was not the rector. After all, he was once considered the most brilliant student in the course. His thesis was later published in a separate book. He could and liked to talk, was artistic and very good-looking. It's time to be in the movies. In short, if it was necessary to represent the university somewhere, including abroad, he would fit perfectly with this very Dimka, who speaks so fast that you can't always understand him, especially if he is passionate about the topic. Now it's hard to believe that up until the 4th year they were thick as thieves. Every summer they went on archaeological expeditions, and if anything, they stood for each other. At that time, none of them thought about high positions. Dimka, however, even now is completely indifferent to titles and regalia. And when he was offered to move to the ministry, he flatly refused. University was his life, very much his brainchild. Jacob once wanted to be an archaeologist too. He spent his whole life on expeditions. Even at the bottom of the sea, he was ready to search for submerged antiquities. But his parents intervened. It was their initiative, defense of a candidate's thesis, and then a doctorate. Their connections played a big role in the fact that his path to science was smooth, without a hitch. Jacob has been lecturing ever since. At first, he was stuffy in the university walls. He dreamed of the old days, the archaeology camp, the digging, the campfire songs. But he was the only son of his parents. Both his father and mother had overbearing personalities, and he couldn't break free for a while. Then his father died. His mother became ill. He realized that he couldn't go far away. He lived alone. He had a beautiful apartment near the university, but he visited his mother several times a week. If she was feeling well, and if she was ill, he moved in with her for a while. So when acquaintances talked to him about marriage, Jacob, laughing, said that he had an old girl on his hands, so a young wife he would not pull. And his wife would not want to share him with his mother, who had such a difficult character. So past the time when he was considered a promising bachelor in the eyes of society. For him, however, that time was over. After all, even now, when he was well into his 40s, or rather under 50, he retained his imposing appearance, artistry, and sonorous expressive voice. Last years among the students did not sparkle, and not a single bright star. Every year there was an inevitable dropout. Guys were leaving. The last example when 2 students took their documents and got a job at the streetcar depot. There was good money to be made there. Girls got married one after another, took a leave of absence, and went on maternity leave. And those who studied with visible labor got a haul from exam to exam, from course to course. Everyone knew that he was single, and many hoped to screw him. Before, they even argued about who would succeed. Later, the bar was lowered. It became clear that none of the girls, even the most beautiful, will not take to the wedding. But to visit him at home to get credit, it was quite realistic. And there were girls who could tell about these visits, but for some reason they all kept silent. And what happened at the professor's house was not discussed at home. Only Nancy once said, "What a bastard he is." What did that mean? Nancy didn't want to discuss it, and the professor lived his life to his heart's content. A couple of times a year, he would find a companion caregiver for his mother and go on vacation in winter to a ski resort, and in summer to any of the European countries to see the antiquities dear to his heart. When his mother's friends asked her if Igor had finally gotten married, if he had at least had children, the elderly woman only waved away passers-by, and I was completely satisfied with this state of affairs. And as long as she was alive, she wasn't going to share her son with anyone. Kate and Betty became friends by accident. Betty came from a small town. She went to university because she did well here in the regional center. Her aunt lived with her, and Betty settled in. Her house was on the very outskirts of town. It took an hour to get to the university on her aunt's bus. To be honest, there was no time for her niece. She was fighting with her husband. The matter was heading for divorce. At home, there were empty liquor bottles on the cupboard, and the collection was regularly replenished. Her aunt had no children of her own, nor did she have any experience with them, and she looked to Betty for a girlfriend. In the evenings, when the girl was a woman, came to her with another bottle of sweet liquor and 2 glasses. Betty knew that now the aunt would complain to her for a long time about her life, about her husband, and she had to give in and sympathize. It was risky to object, because at any moment the aunt could say go to the dormitory. And Betty didn't want to go there, because the dormitory was really bad. 2 9-story red brick buildings with communicating passages only looked presentable from the outside. Inside there was an atmosphere that showed that the university did not have an extra penny. Ragged walls, elevators that almost never worked. Broken windows in the halls had glass put in, but every now and then they were broken again. The kitchen had 1 stove for the entire floor, so the students kept illegal stoves in their rooms, and the hot water was constantly cut off. In short, only a few students lived in the dormitory from the first year. Until the last, everyone tried to find a couple among the natives of the big city and move in with a friend or girlfriend in normal conditions. Betty tried to study at night, but then she would come to class. Tired in the classroom, she could doze off in lecture. Once even hopped and became the subject of ridicule, classmates, and bullying the instructor. He took mortal offense. You see, his lectures make some people drowsy. As a result, Betty had to drop all other subjects and learn only ethnography. To crawl through the session, and the position was difficult. Even a small scholarship meant a lot to her. Betty was raised by one mother, and she could not give her much money. Practically the whole amount Betty gave to her aunt for food, left herself only for travel, and to go to the movies, to buy herself new tights, a common notebook for the lecture. There should have been enough scholarship money to save for all of this. Betty tried to walk more. And once she got lost in an unfamiliar courtyard. She didn't know much of the big city yet, just exploring it. I was attracted to the old ones, and she herself did not notice how she found herself on this quiet street, which literally breathed the 19th century. Realizing that she was lost, Betty began to look around, who would ask for directions. There was a girl about her age sitting on a bench in the courtyard. Betty turned to her and asked, "Where do you want to go?" The girl asked. Actually, Betty had to go home to her aunt. That's why she needed the bus stop number 1. The girl at the marshal in the forehead thinking, "You should go to the highway, but it's far to go there, it's better to go to the streetcar stop." The girl was very beautiful with dark hair around her face. Betty also noticed that the bench sent for now with such a bench is usually used by elderly people who have a hard time moving around. Betty had walked around town a lot this day and now realized she was tired. She sat down next to her acquaintance. The girls got to talking. To Betty's surprise, it turned out that they studied at the same university. "Only I'm at the biology department," Kate explained. "As a part-time student, I couldn't get to the university every day. But when I'm in session, my father drives me." "Do you live here?" Kate nodded at one of the beautiful old houses. "That's our apartment. Lucky you," Betty said. But it was obvious that her envy was light, as they say, white. "Would you try our dorm? The elevator worked 3 days a year maybe. And I live on the 9th floor. I couldn't get up there." Kate laughed. "We also have mice and even rats." Betty chimed in. "Recently a mouse ran right into the middle of the room during the day." "Wow. I thought I was having a glitch. I used to live in the wrong place," said Kate. "Way out in the middle of nowhere. We had mice here first, too. The scariest thing is that they can eat supplies in the winter. Cereal. Then my mom brought a cat. I'd like a cat too. They won't allow it in the dorms. Restrict about pets. Although I know the girls on the 7th floor have a canary. Well, or rather, kinder, and they call him General Secretary in honor of the head of the group," sighed Betty. The girls chatted. It was only when she started blowing her nose that Betty remembered she had to leave. "And you're not around much." You could hear the regret in Kate's voice. "If you're ever in the area, stop by. Everyone says college is the golden age. I don't have any girlfriends." Kate rose to her feet, and Betty noticed that she was moving with great difficulty, heavy on the stick. She didn't bother to ask what was wrong. Maybe Kate is uncomfortable talking about it, but the girl explained the oldest injury. "Maybe if they had operated right away, it would be better now, but there was no opportunity. My dad keeps threatening to send me abroad. They say they'll do the operation there. I'll be able to fly like a butterfly." Betty sighed, and Kate's dad was lucky too. She'd never even been to the sea herself. From then on, Betty, if she made it downtown and herself to the regional library, she was often needed. She always looked into a familiar courtyard and often stood Kate there. The girls chatted about everything in the world. Betty admitted that studying was not easy for her. She was an excellent student at school, but there were so many new subjects at once. To prepare for seminars, you have to sit in the reading room, work with sources, then at bus stops to catch the last bus. And the scariest thing is to get home in dark courtyards. Even the lights are not always on there. I walk with a flashlight. "Where do you want to go later?" Kate asked. "I'd sooner finish the institute and come home. I only have my mom. I miss her. The other girls don't understand me. No one wants to leave here. It's a big city. So many opportunities. They just want to get married, that's all." "You haven't fallen in love with anyone here?" Kate asked. "None of the boys seem to be paying attention to me." There's this one teacher, the star of the screen. Well, she's hoping he'll fall in love with me. That's ridiculous. What if he does? Kate asked slyly. No. But if you go abroad, you could have an affair with some rich foreigner. Are you that pretty? Betty shook his head. I need to heal first. I don't even think about it. I don't even think about it. I want to wander through the woods to our southern lakes, Kate said soberly. Her face became dreamy, but she did not continue the subject, and Betty learned nothing new about her friend. It was only during the session in absentia that she was amazed to see Kate, leaning on a stick, getting out of such a familiar car. Did David bring it to you himself? After a moment, she asked. Of course, I'm his daughter. Kate looked at her in surprise. Didn't you know? I never mentioned it. Well, I didn't have to. Yeah, I hardly ever see my dad. He's always away at work. So it's pretty much just me and my mom. Kate tried to walk so that she was as little visible as possible, but she wasn't very good at it. Nevertheless, she passed the session with flying colors. And not because she was the rector's own daughter. Kate studied with passion and had a memory, which in common parlance is called a photographic page of textbooks. She memorized and retold them verbatim. What she regretted most was that she would not be able to go with the other students on the internship. Kate had only to listen to their enthusiastic stories when they returned. Betty was not doing so well. She couldn't pass her exams and was in danger of not being admitted to the exams. She approached David with mixed feelings. First of all, she really needed his signature on the credit books. And secondly, she seemed to be terribly afraid of the professor. But deep down, she knew what that meant. Betty was in love with him. Betty and Lucky. Jacob was in the office alone sorting through some papers. Usually he was always surrounded by students. Betty approached so timidly that if she had seen herself from the outside, she would have remembered a yard dog determined to enter the house. What did you want? Jacob asked. Without raising her eyes, you can stop talking about Betty. The professor looked at the girl ironically and at the same time evaluating. Betty was not bad at all, medium height with a good figure. Golden red, curly hair falling below her shoulders. Her eyes were a big green. The only thing that spoiled her was her unclean complexion. Betty tried to scrounge up the money for a beautician for treatments. But it rarely worked, and it didn't help much. Jacob sighed. What took you so long? It's Friday. Your exams start next week. Until the credits are closed, you won't even be allowed to take the first one. I know. And why did you do so poorly in my subject? Betty could have told me that she had her work cut out for her other credits. Jacob was hoping to cheat. He often gave students such a party, handed out assignments, and left the room. But it didn't work this time. What do you suggest we do? Betty stood signing that we were, after all, hard to sign, saying something like, hopefully next semester you will live up to my trust and get credit, not the exam. It's out there hesitating whether to give a 3 or a 4. Professors know a student's scholarship is hanging by a thread for the next 6 months. One word counts, and that's it. Prepare and come see me tomorrow, Jacob said. 7 o'clock. I'll write down the address. This was something Betty couldn't imagine. She just clapped her eyes shut. At recess, she couldn't stand it. Shared a student with me. Immediately learned a lot of racy details. It turns out, only from their course. Several girls have already been to Jacob credits and good grades on exams they received. Annotation that went as an appendix. No one complained. He's a real master. The girlfriend enlightened, almost out of envy. You'll like it too. Now Betty was sure that getting ready meant putting on nice lingerie. And things like that. She was going to the professor like a bride to a wedding. Even Auntie noticed you were on a date or something? She asked. Kind of vaguely answered Betty with a little lipstick. Look here, I won't let you drive anyone, Auntie warned. And then wished for details. Who's the boy? Where's he from? Is he from the city or from out of town? Whether it's serious, Betty said without giving it much thought. Her cheeks flushed. She spritzed herself once more with perfume and grabbed her purse. Late for the cab. She couldn't afford one, and it took 2 transfers to get to the professor's house. How many thoughts rattled around in her head as she hesitated to press the call button. When Jacob opened the door, she was unable from excitement to say even hello. To her amazement, his appearance was far from romantic. He didn't resemble a man about to flirt with a girl at all. He rubbed his face with his hands as he made his way into the living room. My big room was a mess right now. Lena looked as if the owner hadn't gotten her hands on it in a long time. Stacks of books everywhere, some papers, notes on the windowsill. The dust from the TV smelled like a cat. Betty turned up her nose. She wasn't wrong. Her aunt's cat litter box smells just like it. And the creep saw that there was a newspaper with a program on the TV. Used it for its intended purpose. Jacob shared. He slipped Betty a sheet of printed questions. Answer these two. You'll get credit. While you're studying, call me. Then Betty stayed in the room greedily perplexed and confused. After a few minutes, she recovered enough to think about the assignment. She began scribbling answers on papers. There was no one in the way of cheating. Finishing, Betty waited for a while. The professor wasn't coming. She tried clicking him, but it came out softly, and he probably didn't hear. So she got up and wandered around the house, hoping to find him. He slept in the small room on the couch with a book. He must have thought he'd dozed off for a few minutes, but he fell soundly asleep. The book had fallen on his chest. Jacob himself reminded Betty of a not young boy and began to feel sorry for him. Betty never thought she could pity a man who stood far above her. With the social ladder in mind, one could wake him up or wait for him to wake up on his own. Or leave the note sheets by the couch and walk away, then get credit on Monday. Betty did neither one, the other, or the third. She went to the bathroom, found a mop bucket and a rag, and started cleaning. She moved quietly. Jacob woke up when it was already dark. He'd forgotten about Betty and her test. It was very rare for him to fall asleep in the middle of the day. And now he woke up with a clear, good head. He was glad of that. Now it was possible to dwell on his work until deep into the night. He was writing a book, but he often lacked either the time or the energy to finish the next chapter. The light was on in the kitchen. Betty Bread ate, drank tea, and read her textbook. And for the first time she was interested. Every word seemed significant, and it felt Betty. Remarkably calm now, as if she were truly at home in this large professor's apartment. Tidied up by her hands, she looked up. Standing in the doorway was Jacob. I guess I should have embarrassed and started making excuses. Like, I'm sorry, I've been running the place without you. But instead Betty asked if you wanted dinner. Yes, Jacob, and it came gradually. The kitchen no longer resembled a warehouse of dirty dishes. The smell of home-cooked food smelled like that of a neighbor who cooked much tastier than Mom and fed Jacob when he was little. I stewed zucchini. Do you have a cottage? Betty asked. He shifted his eyebrows in thought. Some acquaintances brought them. They're obsessed with their dacha. When he had eaten but washed his tea, give me the credit, he said discreetly, changing to you. You have a long way to go home. Betty took the credit as a matter of course. Nodding, she tucked the blue book into her bag. I was gonna clean the windows tomorrow. What time will you be home? Look, I didn't mean to imply that you do the dirty work. You know, messing around in the mud. It's already clean. Betty's not worried at all for some reason. By the window, but where do you live? Asked, she named the most remote neighborhood in the city. Not so long ago, it was considered a village in itself. Where are you going now? Stay here. I'll get you some bedding. You can sleep in the big room on the couch. I'll worry about Betty dropping her chin. Did you get home safely or not? I'm the reason you're late. Betty thought she should call her aunt and warn her. Her aunt's house seemed far away now, as if from another life. She texted her aunt to stay at a friend's house. It's okay. Betty couldn't sleep for a long time. The couch was soft, but it was narrow. And every hour and every half hour the antique clock chimes. So Betty knows for sure it's 3:00 a.m. and she's still awake. She managed to doze off before dawn, but not for long at all. Nevertheless, she jumped up first. I was drinking my second cup of coffee by the time the owner woke up. Saturday afternoon slipped by. Betty was washing the windows and making lunch. Jacob hadn't gone anywhere. He worked in his office. And when there was a break, he and Betty chatted. Betty talked and he listened. That's how I found out how she lived with her mom in her small town. and now with her aunt-uncle, and how she wished her college years would just slip by so she could go home. "Are you really going to school?" Jacob wondered. Of course, Betty. Raz splashed the ox on the glass in a special liquid and took a rag. "I have my favorite teacher there. She's retired now. She's got a workload. You know what it is? 40 odd is more than 2 jobs. It's very hard. Nobody's going to school. I'll be there and Wendy will feel better." And Betty made a soup that made her dizzy even from the smell. After they ate, the girl put the pots in the fridge. "I think you'll have enough for 3 days. And then that he looked at her questioningly in front of Varia, that she wiped her wet hands and began to pack. Auntie there was already worried, probably left alone Jacob. He thought about it. Never before had the idea of having a housekeeper crossed his mind. Yes, he often had women over and stayed overnight. But he'd never thought of an au pair. Usually strangers in the apartment annoyed him, but Betty did not. She was easy to talk to and even silent. She didn't need to be impressed. The girl lives poorly. Rada will probably have a part-time job. Why not? Her peers work part-time in cafes and pizzerias as waiters. Hand out advertising leaflets on the streets, and some even work at a gas station. Worse yet, homework is on fire. She'll be excited about the opportunity. And the next time the girl came to him, he said bluntly, "If you a couple times a week to clean up, I can pay you so much. How's that?" Betty turned pale, then blushed, and then quietly said okay. She came to work neatly, like clockwork. Soon there wasn't a corner of the apartment that hadn't been touched by her caring hands. She was sorting out closets, organizing his closet. God, he didn't realize he had so many shirts and sweaters and vests. All of it lurking in the depths of the chief veneer. And he wore what hung closest. Now his refrigerator was never empty. Returning home, he was pleased to think of the deliciousness that awaited him. Already a month later, his mother, whom he visited, squinting, diagnosed him. "You found yourself a good woman, a servant," he explained with a smile. "Pay her well and leave her alone. You should dust her. You look like a different person." Jacob so in his mind treated Betty better than well. He gave her the keys to the apartment and had a special card that held money for the household. He let Betty spend it however she wanted and never asked for an accounting. And punished Betty's supreme trust. He remained his own man in front of her. He could doze off, he could work, he could be silent or start sharing thoughts that came into his head. But he was completely incapable of seeing Betty as a woman. He could say to her, "Betty, can't you make a snack tomorrow? Buy a nice wine. I have a friend coming over." He didn't notice how the girl's expression changed, how she bit her lip. Betty nodded silently and disappeared into the kitchen. The aunt didn't know her niece worked part-time. She thought she had a busy college life, sitting in the library, running to the movies to hang out with her friends, or partying at dances. But too tired, silent girl returned home. Now she did not wait for her aunt to call her for a drink. She often offered to sit down herself, and when her aunt poured her a second, and then a third glass, she didn't refuse. They say that love changes a man for the better. At any rate, his eyes began to burn. Betty's eyes became tense and anxious, like she'd been waiting for something all along, and she didn't see her friends at all. Not even Kate, whom she loved very much. There was no time to drop in. Christmas was approaching. Betty knew her mom was waiting for her, counting the days until the winter session was over. But Betty invariably managed to make it out for the holiday itself. She and her mom never went anywhere. Like most people thought Christmas was a family affair, and there was never a penny to spare. They set the table for 2. Mom cooked a specialty dinner that smelled good. It made the whole neighborhood drool. We celebrated Christmas, local time. We went to bed almost as soon as the concert started. Woke up late. We ate out of the fridge, just like everybody else. And we were sure to shout out money to each other for presents. Betty managed to save up for her mom's gold ring last year. It seemed easy to do without jewelry, but her mother had been used to denying herself everything all her life. And her daughter wanted to pamper her. So Mom bought Betty a set of cosmetics. She looked at it, leafing through the catalog, but she couldn't even think of spending such a sum. This year, too, Betty was going to be going home at least the morning of December 31. Jacob would probably not want to settle for hawkers for the holiday. Obviously, he had restaurants or some new girl planned for the holiday. Betty, not to suffer. It's best not to see it. But just before New Year's Eve, the professor got sick. Usually the flu would hit their town in February and recede in March with the cold. But there was no doubt about it. Jacob had caught the flu. High fever, bone-chunky sore eyes. Classic picture, sure you better not come to me, said the professor on the phone to his assistant. Who's after you? What about you alone? The girl was confused. Still wasn't going to go anywhere. Perhaps he was lying. But Betty imagined the picture of a sick man, who no one needs in the literal sense of the word. No one to pour water for him or call an ambulance if he needed it. All his girlfriends had scattered, of course. She sat her lip down. That same day, she called home. Mom, I can't make it. Don't worry about it, but it just happened. We have an exam on the 27th. So, counseling. The girls and I will study together. Yeah, well, I can't get away. You should go to your neighbor's. She'll be glad. Ed, the lonely old neighbor, also spent Christmas alone with the TV. They'll both have more fun with their mom. On December 24, Betty was unlocking the door with her key, as if nothing had happened. Jacob was lying on the couch, covered with a blanket. There was a glass of tea on the nightstand next to him. The professor looked most unhappy. At the same time, he was very surprised to see her. But I told you to put it in the corridor and go away. I'm very grateful to you, but I don't want you to get sick. I won't get sick, said Betty firmly, though she didn't feel any confidence. I'm inoculated. I'll get you all cleaned up and we'll have a party. I forgot to ask, Christmas tree. Do you have at least a small, artificial one in the household? I haven't put one up for a long time. It's only when there are children in the family. I understand. Betty put her hand on the professor's forehead when the temperature was last measured. An hour ago. So now I feed you a little. Then we drink a fever reducer. Then you sleep while I clean up the place. Jacob felt so weak. He wanted to obey that, sure to him young voice. He was happy to let Betty take control. By evening, the apartment shone with cleanliness. There was a live Christmas tree in the great room. There weren't many toys, but the lights from the garland created a kind of magical ambience. Betty was in the kitchen, and Jacob, who was feeling a little better, was sitting covered with pillows. He was watching a comedy. Eating a red fish sandwich and drinking cranberry Mars. He thought, and that in his time even his mother did not care about him so much, and the holiday was not celebrated honorably. At exactly midnight, the champagne glasses were raised. Everything that Betty had prepared seemed unusually delicious to the professor. The girl didn't let him sit for long. She made sure Jacob drank the medicine, turned out the lights. Only the lights on the Christmas tree remained, and the professor fell asleep so soundly that he was not disturbed even by fireworks and firecrackers under the window. Laughter and shouts of drunken companies that gathered in the yard. Jacob woke up at dawn. It was already quiet outside the window. Even the most stalwart had gone home, and he was as wet as a mouse. He didn't call Betty, but she heard him stirring somehow. She came and helped him to change into dry clothes, brought him a drink, and he went back to sleep in the sound sleep of a man on the mend. Betty was in vain, assuring me that she would never fall ill. The flu had caught up with her, and now it was the professor's turn to take care of his assistant. He's not letting her go anywhere. You want to infect your mom or your aunt? Stay here. I can't get infected. I'm immune. I'll call a doctor and we'll be back on our feet in no time. They ended up spending New Year's Eve together. Jacob helped Betty study for her exams. All moral barriers melted away during that time, and the girl had never felt so happy. The professor, when he saw the gift to the girl, it was a book he wanted to have, but the price made him wave away the purchase. Betty, did you get the inheritance? Saying that, he realized that the joke wasn't quite right. The girl only had her mom, and losing her would be a tragedy for Betty. Well, I was going to say, did you rob a bank just to save up? Betty jerked his shoulder, showing that the problem wasn't worth the attention. Of the money I gave you, you didn't spend any of it on yourself. I couldn't take money from myself, to look after you for a fee." She stabbed his shoulder and he hugged her gently. Betty only came home for the last few days of the vacation. She could see that her mother missed her very much and was sad that she would have to be separated again soon. But looking at her daughter closely, she said, "I've never seen you so happy." God willing. Apparently, Mommy was on to something. Aunt Betty said she would be staying with a friend from the new semester. The old woman was pleased. "That's right. You'll be better off with a friend, going to classes, dancing, and talking together. And it's a long way from my university to yours. Good for you for making that decision." The only person Betty told the whole truth about the blockade. The girl herself couldn't give herself a reason why she decided to open up to her. Kate was not just calm, serious. There was a kind of inner strength in her. Betty had never heard her friend lose her temper, become indignant. Betty explained the mutilation. Kate had been through too much. Right now, Kate only said, "You didn't ask what his plans were?" "No," Betty answered. "How can I influence anything? Who am I around him?" The corner of Kate's mouth twitched a little. But Betty knew her friend too well to see it as mockery. "I think he wants us to go away together this summer." Betty remembered. "He said he never vacationed in Russia. He said I should get a passport too. He talked me into leaving uni." What did Betty think she was listening to? "I know the story from my father, but I gave my word not to discuss it with anyone. I'm sorry, I can't even tell you. But Kate, please, please," Betty begged. "You realize no one cares as much as I do, but I promised. All I can say is if you tell Jacob to go somewhere by the sea where archaeologists are digging, he'll be much happier than he is now." It's like her idea convinced him it wasn't too late. But Betty let her friend's words pass her ears. Kate obviously doesn't get it. Jacob has everything here: an apartment, a job, status, students, an elderly mom who is unlikely to be able to move. In short, the tree has grown all its roots into the soil here. How could it be uprooted in February when spring was in the air and the days were getting longer? Betty realized she was pregnant. Later, she didn't know why she decided to hide it for a while. The fact that she was going to have a child was a joy to her. Everything was going to be okay now. Jacob said himself that his life had begun to change. When Betty came in to sign or not, it didn't matter. But no one had ever given Jacob a gift like she would. She decided to confess to him on his birthday. The pregnancy had been very easy for her. There was no nausea or dizziness. More often than usual, she wanted to sleep, and the smell of peppermint was maddeningly annoying. That's all, and she looked better. Her face, on which she had previously had to put so much abnormal cream, became clean and smooth. She put on a little weight. Her look became calm and confident. Thanks to Jacob, she was now well-dressed and had been out and about more than once. Betty was catching interested glances from men. At the university, she didn't tell anyone about her affair. If the girls noticed that she was no longer rushing to the bus stop to go to her aunt's house in a distant neighborhood, Betty said that she was now living in an apartment. Nevertheless, the affair was soon made known on the course. But Betty behaved in such a way that she was not allowed to ask questions, and gradually the fellow students backed off. No one took Betty's relationship with Jacob as anything serious. Once it became known that Betty was invited to the professor as a cleaner, and the girls concluded that the professor had successfully arranged a free servant, plus intimate services. Very convenient. But of course, none of this would last long. Too plain and unassuming. Betty for a man like Jacob. If he ever marries, then certainly not to such and classmates. Talking to Betty, pretended not to know anything. Yes, the anniversary was far away, but Jacob could not make his birthday go unnoticed. It was customary to bring champagne and hors d'oeuvres to the university department, to treat colleagues, to accept congratulations. And the professor kept the most expensive wine in his office in case of important guests. The rector also stopped by on this day, but it wasn't worth spending a collector's French wine on David. He did not know anything about drinks and preferred a shot of white wine, and occasionally on special occasions. Actually, his doctors had forbidden it. A stomach ulcer. Alcohol was to be avoided. At home, Jacob told Betty, "I didn't want you to bother. Let's go to the restaurant. Everyone will see us." Betty waited for Jacob to say, "So what? Let them look and be jealous." But he reassured her with the wrong words. "It's a small restaurant, very quiet. We'll rent an office. I'm sure no one will notice." Betty put on a new dress, blue, velvet. I guess her fellow students aren't adorable. They'd share one of these. They'd say it was old-fashioned. But Betty wasn't much of a fashionista, even though she now had the opportunity to dress well. She found the dress very pretty, and the pearl earrings she'd chosen for the day were nice too. Before leaving them alone, the waiter lit a candle on the table. Jacob had placed the order himself. He knew Betty wasn't versed in fine cuisine, and the names of the dishes didn't mean anything to her, but he decided to treat a Cinderella. "You're probably wondering why I didn't get you anything?" said Betty, and looking at Jacob with loving eyes. "Yes, I have everything in the world. I don't want you to cut yourself any slack." "Well, let's just say it's not everything in the world. Anyway, I wanted to tell you." She winced for a few seconds, and then he got her news, hung up the silence. And the longer it dragged on, the more Betty seemed to think that something was going wrong in a very different way than she had imagined. Betty softly began Jacob, "What do I want you to do now so you don't think I'm a sneak? Think about it. Let's take this easier. You and I will go, you'll be looked at. I'll pay for everything, and the problem will be solved." He didn't say that dreaded word he wanted to throw words at him, assuring him that it would be painless, comfortable, safe, that everything would soon be forgotten. "Good?" he asked with a soft smile, stroking his hand. "Good." She didn't hear her voice. "You realize you have to finish your studies, and I don't need and never have needed babies. Of course it's my fault. I realize that. I'm not denying it. You're too young and inexperienced. So let me atone for it by promising you won't experience anything less than the dentist's office." "You're right, Betty." "Good," she whispered. A quarter of an hour later, she said, excusing herself to go to the bathroom. Near the front door, she turned, ran sharply out of the restaurant, stopped the first car she could find, and gave the address to her aunt. When she showed up at her relative's house, frozen tooth on tooth, with eyes like she had just buried her closest loved one, the aunt froze. Please pour me your Limonov liquor. If you don't have vodka," said Betty. "I've collapsed the university," said Betty to her friend. She and Kate sat in the garden on the glass loggia. Kate had grown all sorts of things. It was warm and had 2 cozy chairs. This was where Kate liked to work, sitting under the roofing and green leaves. "What do you mean you're leaving?" Kate asked, and in her voice Betty heard a metal that she had never felt before. "But I can't see him every day, and I have to go. He can't leave a job that's so lucrative. He's the king of God at uni. The students look at his mouth." "Exactly. He's not going to go away," Kate said. "And you've got nothing under your belt. If you drop out, you'll have to go home. You don't have a university there, you'll be without a full education. I won't have time to study now, where and with a baby allowed in the dormitory. I think the second floor is for families. Now they'll give you a room. Do you know how they live there? Our dorm is in the private sector. There's no mains. Only boiling water comes out of the tap. Can you imagine? Somebody has no hot water, and the dorm has no cold water. The girls are washing diapers, and my hands are red as beads. And to go to uni, everyone knows and whispers. And I hear that whispering behind my back all the time. And I don't think Jacob's gonna let me compromise him like this. If I don't get an abortion, he'll get me out of the university." Kate sat in silence, thinking about something. "I want to talk to him," she said finally. "What in God's name are you talking about?" Betty opened her eyes. "Are you threatening to have your dad ruin Jacob's career? If you won't marry me, please don't. I wouldn't marry him at all now, even if he proposed. After he sent me away. He's got a dad of his own, I'll leave him out of it. He's not of this world at all." Kate grinned slightly and gave Betty a very grown-up look. "He'll pay off the necessary equipment for the lab, but he'll forget that there's no cold water in the dormitory. Can you believe it, Betty, he eats pumpkin. He loves pumpkin more than anything else in the world and asks his mom to make it every day. He doesn't need no spread. And his favorite shirt has been changed for the 3rd decade. He's used to nothing else. You shouldn't let Daddy be involved in any of your worldly matters. It's ridiculous. Don't worry, Betty. I won't intimidate your Jacob, and I won't ask him for anything. I'm just going to tell my story. What story haven't you told me? No, I haven't. I gave my mom my word that no one would ever find out. And you know I keep my word. But now please give me your Jacob's cell phone number. Maria, Kate's mother, was from Canada. It was a very quiet corner with only one convenience store. We took the bus to the center twice a week. The young people from here invariably left when they finished school. It was a good thing Maria's family had many children. Brothers and sisters made up for the lack of friends. There was someone to play with, to wander in the forest. Maria's parents sadly realized that it was not their chicks who would fly out of the nest, although they themselves were not going to move to the city, and hoped that at least one of the children would stay to brighten their old age. Maria was 16 years old when Kevin, a new man, arrived in the village. But Kevin would have attracted attention in any society. He was a little over 30 at the time. Until recently, he'd been working as a geologist, but then something had gone to his head. As Maria's mother indelicately put it, and he wished to live in the arms of nature, to hunt, to plant a vegetable garden. He wished to eat what he had grown and to drink key water, to be surrounded by forest, birds, animals, and no people. He came to the village to find such a place in the vicinity and settle there. He seemed to be a healthy man, his mother said, as he had to work and work and work. But what's he up to? He's healthy, but his head must be sick. Nevertheless, when Kevin paid those people who knew the area well, they pointed him to a hunting hut far away in the woods. It had been abandoned for the last few years, only occasionally occupied by those who went out with a gun for trophies and came back. Kevin came to like it. The place suited him completely. Absolute silence. A small creek in the neighborhood. The cabin had a stove and the essentials of a table. A few benches. I'm ready to buy this house, he said, only to be laughed at. Who would sell that hut? No one lives there. She settles in by accident. No one will kick her out. Maria knew the place well. There was a time when she and the boys used to play there. It's funny because they have their own house there. But it was always summer, and they'd linger in the hut. Well, if it was just for a few hours. And in the evening they were expected, the house surrounded. But the girl could not imagine that it was possible to stay in this wilderness for the winter. It's freezing out here. The snow falls over my head. If anything happens, I'll try to get to people. She had no idea that her opinion would soon change. There were no guys her age or older in the village. Who could she set her eyes on? Kevin was the first to take notice. And soon the girl fell madly in love with him. At first it seemed innocent enough. Maria helped Georgie to get used to the local area, showed him plants, taught him what was poisonous, what was edible, where it was better to pick mushrooms, where hunting was good, and where it was useless to wait for the beast. She carried him from home milk and bread, bought at his request in the village store needles, threads, and all sorts of small things, and did not notice how the time came when she could not live without Kevin. When Maria told her parents that she was moving into the hut, they were stunned. Then the mother began to live as a schoolgirl's father, and the father threatened to shoot his daughter's chosen one with a hunting rifle. But the girl at that time felt happy and said Alyosha still will not hold on. I'll run away to him. If he lets me go in good faith, I'll visit you, but not. So let's say goodbye for good. Her parents knew Maria's stubborn, unyielding character and realized she would still do her own thing. The next day, the daughter packed her things in a backpack and left, humming her new life. But soon she regretted what she had done. Her parents didn't recognize it. Maria had always been secretive, shared only about the good things, and all the difficulties and sorrows experienced alone. At first, everything went well in the new place. Maybe if the girl had lived in the city before, she would immediately feel the change and be disappointed. For Maria, there was the usual housework. She knew how to cook, sew, do laundry in her snug hut brought coziness. Once a month together with her husband, she came to the village, visited her parents, brought them forest guests. Usually it was Siberian berries or fresh fish. Maria washed in the bathhouse, and no wonder, and the village councils. And the next day she would go back to her forest hut with Kevin. And then winter came. This year it was particularly harsh. It was impossible to walk to the village. There was too much snow, and the young woman spent her days in the small hunting lodge. The stove had to be stoked often. The cabin put out in a flash from all the entertainment, a few books in the counted already 100 times. Maria couldn't wait for it to get warmer, for the forest trails to dry, and for her to be able to visit her own. When she finally reached the village, she learned the bitter news. Her father had died at the beginning of winter, and her mother had fallen ill. Maybe it was because she had lost the man she had lived with all her life. Maybe because she was worried about the fate of her youngest daughter, one way or another. She could not be without medical care, and the older children took her to their home in the city. The native house met Maria, boarded up windows. That same year, Maria became pregnant. Then she for the first time stammered that probably for the first time she should move closer to people, return to the village, get on the register, so that help would be nearby, if anything. And when the child was born, until it grew up a little, you can't keep it in the middle of nowhere. But Kevin dismissed all her plans. He began to assure Maria that she had to rely on nature. Childbirth is a natural process, and everything will be fine. And never a city wife's child will grow up so strong and healthy, as their son will grow up here in the fresh air and healthy food. There was some doubt in Maria's soul. She would feel more comfortable if she could get to a doctor in case of need. But Kevin never tired of assuring her that she was a young, strong girl and everything would go well. Maria only managed to take one promise from him. The baby must be born in a maternity hospital. My mother told me that one time she almost died when my brother Liam was born. It's times like this when you need doctors to be there for you. Kevin promised. However, when it was time to get out of the wilderness, it proved impossible. It was raining very hard. There was nothing to think about to get to the hospital in advance. Maria was worried. Kevin again assured her that everything would be just right, and even though the young woman had to suffer a lot, a strong, healthy boy was born. Maria tried to persuade her husband to make contact with the big land. She would be calmer if the doctor examined the child and said that he was all right, but Kevin refused flatly. Now, in his opinion, the young mother just needed to recuperate. Kevin himself cooked food, fed Maria, was caringly gentle, and she for a while resigned herself to the state of affairs. Now, even in winter, Maria had no time to be bored. Wherever her husband went, she was never alone. The child was with her. The mother was worried that the baby might catch cold. She often stoked the stove, and still the hut was colder than usual. In the winter months, it used to be in her home. But little Vanya did not fall ill. Trouble came in the spring, when the sun had already warmed up, and mother and child spent a lot of time in the fresh air. The baby was crawling on the grass. He picked up a tick, but when the kid got sick, his parents couldn't help him. The boy died of encephalitis. It was the hardest time of Maria's life. She hated herself for not insisting. She had to move with her son at least for a while to the empty parents' house. Kevin took his son's death much more calmly. That's the way it is in nature, he said, natural selection. Only the strongest survive. Encephalitis cures itself without medication. If Jack wasn't meant to be, that was his fate. A cemetery funeral was also out of the question, according to Kevin. You and I know how it happened, but strangers might not believe it. And in any case, they'll blame us for everything. They'll say we shouldn't have raised the child in the woods, that we killed him. Didn't we? Maria looked up with tears in her eyes. No one can forbid us to live the way we think is right. Kevin spoke firmly. Everything will work out for us. You'll see. Maybe if Maria had her father and mother waiting for her, she would have packed up and gone to them. But the people closest to her already lived far away from here. And Kevin constantly insinuated Maria that she had no one but him, that only he needed her. And the young woman agreed to stay. A year and a half later, by the time the girl Maria was born, it was already hard to recognize. Quite young, she looked almost twice her age. Her hands had been chopped off by hard work. Hope long ago disappeared cheerful and sly expression, which before was characteristic of her. It felt so much like her. And it didn't matter that when Kevin went to the village to buy some clothes and groceries, she just waved her hand. Go buy what you want yourself. What if you don't guess the size? I don't care what you bring, I'll wear it. She really became completely indifferent to her appearance, and maybe to her fate. She wasn't expecting anything anymore. Yesterday was like today. So monotonously passed a month, 2 months. Meanwhile, the second labor was easier and the woman in labor was quicker on her feet. The baby she now had was not coming down from her arms. Kevin had hoped for a second time that there would be a son, and when he became the father of a daughter, declared that he would raise her as a boy. Maybe some higher power took pity on the girl and her mother. It is not known whether Maria would have been able to bear the loss of a second child or not. Kevin's assurances that nature does everything right, performing natural selection, reassured her not too much. Little Kate's childhood was not easy. No toys to amuse her peers, no special food choices, no cartoons. The simplest food her father had gotten, and the simplest clothes her mother sewed and gave her a single doll, also handmade. Of course, childhood finds its joys everywhere, and Kate enjoyed fiddling with the horns, spending whole days in the woods and learning the lessons her father had taught her. By the time the children were ready to go to school, Kate could read and count to 100, and she could survive a few days in the taiga even if there were no adults around. But in winter it was hard. It was literally cold, hungry, and lonely. You could not go anywhere from home, especially in the cold. The older Kate got, the more she realized, the more often she noticed that her mother was trying to change her life. All for her sake. A daughter needs to study, she told her father. Come on, you'll get there. You really need to. We'll teach her ourselves. But these schools are full of vices. Children learn one from another, and by the time they graduate, they drink, smoke, and cohabit with each other. I didn't drink or smoke. Mom objected. You're just lucky you didn't get spoiled. And Kate, who's going to get led astray. Sooner or later people will come here. The mother would come in from the other end, and it would be known that the child was sitting at home and not going to school. Will be taken away. Kate will be deprived of parental rights. If you go back and forth to the village, that's how it'll be. You'll complain about life there. Write that your husband abuses you, keeps you in brutal conditions. Then you'll lose your daughter for sure. And if you don't bother people, no one will interfere in our lives. The gypsies live as they want. No one touches them. But we started with Mom, and we're hermits. It's our choice. Her father cut her off. It may be your choice, but it's not ours. Once dared Mom to say, I wouldn't dream of cleaning pots with river sand and wearing Latin. Paid skirt, you don't like it? Her father looked at her intently. Go back to your village, and I'll take Kate and go with her where you won't find us. Not me, not her mom. Kate realized that parting them from each other would be the hardest thing in the world. There was no telling how or when their fate would have changed. But misfortune helped. Her father started taking lion hunting, and at an unfortunate hour, they encountered a bear. And if Mom hadn't rushed out to find them, Kate would have died. That's when her leg was mangled. How her mother dragged her daughter to the village before people Kate does not remember. Her mother told me that she carried her in her arms, that she had made some branches and held on through the roadless area. Lucky she didn't get lost. Only one thing Kate's mom kept saying, don't tell anyone about Dad. Don't talk about Dad to Mom. He'll die out there. He's all alone. Don't tell. Mom kept telling her daughters. It seemed that at these moments she was out of her mind. Father is lying there alone in the taiga, and there's no help for him. Mother must have realized that if he stayed alive, he would never give them peace. So she chose such a cruel way to be free, since fate provided the clue. Kate didn't really care about much else. She was in too much pain, too much blood loss. She was in for heavy treatment, several surgeries. But the doctors said that she would have to walk with a crutch, or at best, with a stick. At the hospital, Kate was looked at as a wonder, as some kind of female Mowgli, and everything around her was so unfamiliar and alien to her, as if she were on another planet. But soon Kate at the treatment center was loved. She never complained, never got cranky. She behaved with rare courage and unobtrusiveness. Mom told me afterward, she was dealt with. Kate really could have been taken away from her. But Mom somehow managed to convey that together with her daughter became a victim of circumstances, that her husband did not let her and her daughter go to people, or she would have long ago returned to her native home. They were not separated. The mother confessed that her husband had stayed in the taiga. She managed to get her daughter out, but not her husband. But she said that she could not specify the exact place. Of course, a search was organized. Kate understood the mother hoped that while the father was being searched, he would die and the mother would not be considered guilty. After all, the bear had done it. A tragic accident and nothing more. However, the search parties found neither the father nor his body. And for a long time, it was terribly disturbing. Kate's mother was discharged, and she and my mother actually settled in my ancestral home. Both of them after Taiga Hut. Such a life seemed luxurious in the house, 2 rooms, kitchen, bath, and another kitchen. Summer its own garden with apple trees and plums. Maria was pitied. We helped to organize gas, shared things. And at first, they took out food. Then Maria found a job in the village, opened something like a small canteen. And Kate started to study. She didn't go to school, but a teacher went to her and tutored her individually. She said Kate was barely behind her peers. As sharp as she is, of course, she catches up with them quickly. Maria was worried that Kevin would show up sooner or later. She believed he was capable of anything. The worst thing for her was if he took her daughter away with him. She's a mother, she won't have time to call for help, and she'll lose the girl forever. And then archaeologists came to the village. There was a nearby lake, about which legends were made, as if at the bottom of it lies a flooded city and amazing riches. Of course, at all times there were hunters, and they were recruited. They tried to find something without finding anything. But David, who led the expedition, immediately said that he was not going to look for anything underwater. All these are just beautiful fairy tales that have been handed down from generation to generation. But the satellite map is a different matter. It shows that not far from here in the swamp area, there are the remains of an ancient settlement. That's where we should excavate. The archaeologists brought food with them. But when they had an opportunity, they ate not food cooked on the fire, but went to the canteen. They told about Maria, about her unusual fate. And she paid attention to the young woman, began to ask about her life in the taiga. And there he and Maria did not notice how they became attached to each other. David knew that Maria was afraid for the child, but she had nowhere to go. She had no contact with her family, and he offered the woman to go to the city with him. She refused flatly at first. "Do you need someone like me? You'll have me playing the fool all my life. What have I learned in life? And I have nothing. We're dragging from one paycheck to the next. I only have a daughter, and this is someone else's child for you. How can you love her? Listen to me, silly you say, so she'll be with you. They often call me blessed too. I go to work at home, lock the door. If I forget, they'll mix up the salt and sugar. It's impossible to eat lunch afterwards. I even put my shoes on the wrong foot when I was thinking, and then wondered why it was so uncomfortable for me to walk. So I don't know whether such an uncomfortable husband will suit me or not. And as for Kate, where are you going to treat the girl here? She needs neurosurgery. I can show her to some very good doctors. Maybe they can help. Kate will get a good education and never return to the taiga." It was probably with this kind of talk that David broke Maria's resistance. She realized that she would have to trust this man completely and, moreover, entrust her daughter's life to him. But he'll get her out of here and never have to fear for Kate. She didn't know why, but she felt surprisingly calm around the absent-minded scientist. But when her mother told Kate that they would be leaving soon, the girl felt real grief. She made friends with the neighboring family, and the older boy Liam became her loyal friend. At 10 years old, you can fall in love, you know, but how else? Kate, however, herself did not yet realize that she was in love, but to go away to distant lands and never see a bone again. It seemed worse than death to her. Will you write letters to each other? I persuaded my mother, who, as always, understood everything. David signed with Maria as soon as they came to town, and he'd arranged it so that Kate was considered his own daughter. Like he'd been visiting her mother for years, and now he's finally married. Kate was treated in good sanatoriums, taken abroad. A long time ago, no one could think that this girl was once considered Mowgli. Kate grew up to be very beautiful, except for her leg, which had not fully recovered. Some important nerve endings had been damaged. It would have been a beauty contest, If Kate had wanted it, of course. And if it hadn't occurred to her, and it never would have occurred to her, she still wrote letters to Kostya, who had graduated from the Forestry Technical School and was now in the Army, and did not initiate her relatives into the details of this correspondence. Mom, of course, thought that it was the remnants of childhood friendship, which dragged on for years. Well, let her think so. Kate also didn't dream about her father very often. They were terrible dreams. She'd see him in the woods, lying dying in the snow, or she'd think he'd come and knock on the window, wanting to take her with him. She woke up to that knocking. Of course, Kate had girlfriends when she was in the sanatorium, but all those relationships ended when it was time to leave. But Betty, without realizing it, had become attached to her. Sometimes it seemed to her that when she was a child, they had lived in the same village and had been firm friends. Only then they'd forgotten about it. And now what had happened to her friend, Kate took to heart. She couldn't let Jacob break the laces of life and everything like that. That things would go wrong for the girl, Kate had no doubt. Betty was broken. Kate wouldn't allow herself to break down like that even in her most difficult moments about Jacob. Kate had heard from her father. Her stepfather had been called Daddy for a long time now, and surprisingly absent-minded. David often felt sorry for his imposing, confident friend. Jacob should have had a different fate better. It was not uncommon for his father to say. His parents were forcing him to pursue a career, and he had resigned himself to it. It's hard when a man gives up what he has a calling for. Skate Jacob didn't see Jacob, and if it weren't for Betty, wouldn't have felt any interest in this person. Now that she had a piece of paper with his phone number in her hand, she sat for a while, wondering. What would she talk to him about? It would be ridiculous to convince him that Betty was a decent girl and he should marry her. It's a kindergarten, and nothing good will ever come out of the election, and Betty won't agree to it. Kate, lifted up with difficulty, went to the window and stood for a while, staring wildly out into the courtyard, and then returned to her favorite chair and picked up the phone. Jacob, her voice was not like her usual voice now. It sounded different. It's Kate. Do you remember David's daughter? Yes. Rector. Thank you. Nice to meet you too. I'd like to come to you. Yes, home, you heard right. It's not exactly easy for me to walk, but still. No, you're not coming to me, I'm coming to you. I know the address. Please name a time that is convenient for you. Kate felt her interlocutor's slight confusion, but she wasn't going to make it easy for him and reveal her cards right away. Having made an appointment, she ended the conversation. Jacob was really excited. Betty hadn't come to see him in days. He was no longer lecturing in her class. They had not been able to meet in the auditorium. On the contrary, at the university, she had resolutely avoided him, always in his company. He could not approach her. He felt uneasy. There was no telling what a girl could do. She should have agreed to his proposal. Soon she would have forgotten all about it. The old relationship between them could be preserved, at any rate until she finishes college, and there Betty herself will probably find a suitable groom for herself. She can't not realize there's such an age difference between them. He wasn't going to marry anyone. The second option would have been even better if Betty had disappeared from his life altogether. Both of them had made a mistake, and both of them would try to fix it, erase it from their minds. Each would start living their own lives. Worst of all, if a girl starts acting out on her own out of pride over some private citizen, God forbid something untoward happens. He'll be at fault if she decides to have this child, file for child support. Now, that's just not good enough. So everyone knows he's got a son or daughter growing on the side. Betty will start blackmailing him with the baby. There will be no end to her requests. Jacob knew the chancellor had a daughter, and there was talk of her having some kind of health problem. But what did the girl look like? He couldn't even vaguely remember. She wasn't in his department, and she was a part-time student. Why would she need him? And nothing occurred to him. Couldn't the rector, through his daughter, have asked him to write a letter of resignation? David had never acted that way. Maybe there's a guy in this girl who failed a session and she wants to ask for him. What if she heard from the other students about his former habits, and the girls were willing to pay for an A? He saw her on the intercom. A short, dark-haired girl. Kate asked the girl, nodded. He opened the front door. He met Kate by the elevator. He had never paid such respect to any of the female students, but still the only daughter of the rector. Jacob is used to being able to charm girls literally from the first words, and now, as they call it, turned on the charm. However, looking closely at Kate, he began to get confused in words. The girl was amazingly beautiful, truly a gift of nature. She did not need to paint her face, resort to the tricks of cosmetics. But Kate acted as if she were the same age as Jacob, an adult without any embarrassment. He sensed her inner calm. He invited her into the living room, offered her tea or coffee. "Sit down," Kate asked, and when he sank down beside her on the edge of the couch, she said bluntly, "I want to talk to you about Betty." That's it. The last thing Jacob realized was that Betty was clearly a former outsider, could be friends with the chancellor's daughter. Was it as sneaky as he'd never suspected? And what was it? He asked, to give Kate a chance to reveal her cards first. Does she know much she wants to achieve money or for him to marry Betty? "I'm taking responsibility for this child," Kate said. There's no way he expected that. Such direct words, and that she would say exactly that. Damn it, how good was she? And he's a sophisticated man, couldn't take his eyes off Kate. "What do you mean?" Those words came easy to me. My mind was racing. Jacob tried to concentrate. "I'm going to make sure that Betty does well. I'm asking you to stay out of it. You've already made it clear you won't marry her. And I'd talk her out of it, to be honest. It wouldn't work if you forced yourself to do it. She'd have spent her life trying to make you happy. And she'd have ruined her own. That's it now. I mean it. Don't touch her again. I'm taking over." Kate got up almost easily. Jacob wanted to help her walk to the door, but she made a dismissing gesture with her hand, saying, "I can do without your help." He only had to stand in the hallway and watch as the door slammed shut behind her. Later that afternoon, Kate had a long conversation with Betty. "Here's what we're going to do. You're moving in with us now. I don't mind. You'll find a spare room and your parents won't say a word against it," she said. "The first thing we have to do is to get you through university. Not to live without your aunt, not to travel every day across the city in a packed bus. We'll prepare for the spring session together. My dad and mom will be happy that I have a friend now. You'll go to your mom's for the vacations. Of course, she will have to go through all this, but still she will accept it in the fall, who gave birth to more than half a year to an academic. Don't take it, you'll be back by the winter session. Nothing, we'll manage." Kate was right. They did manage to get over the hurdle together. But it was because Betty accepted her position that she was not alone. In the evenings, the two of them would sit and talk about everything. As the warm spring twilight descended upon the land, they drank apple juice and made plans. It was here in this house that it was easiest to study. Maybe it was the example of Kate, who herself sat a lot at textbooks. Betty went home after she had passed her classes with honors. Of course, the first days were not easy for her. Both her mother cried and she herself cried. But to Betty's surprise, her mom was the first to pull herself together and started preparing the baby dowry. At the end of September, baby girl Clara was born, and Kate became her red. Kate knew her friend would be back in a few months, but she still missed her. True, she had to worry these days. Maria was facing a complicated diagnosis because of her mom. She told herself about it. My Dr. Daniel's eyebrows are coming together. I hate the ultrasound machine black and white breaks on the screen always hiding something you didn't realize was there. Take a look at this. This is what I do not like, said Denis Vasilievich in the chest at 10 o'clock tumor, and not all of its features correspond qualitatively. He tries to explain understandable kindly, as it is supposed to the doctor of the paid office. She talks about fuzzy borders and blood flow. Later he leaves the terms and exclaims, looking at my faces no longer professionally, but sincerely. Well, don't bury yourself before your time, and add quietly. On Monday you will come to the oncology. You need to take a pension. It will be made urgently. I go out. I remember in the lobby young administrator describing the account of women waiting in line warm evening behind the open door, the wind plowing in my face. But the whole thing was unreal. It was like through absorbent cotton. and the hand felt like it wasn't my own. I took my cell phone out of my bag. I couldn't call my mom or my sister. I could only call our family doctor, Martin. It was the only thing now, not even a rope, a thread, a salvation. What if there was more to it? Martin, as a musician, has an absolute ear for illness, and they live. My mind was jumbled. I paused, remembering how the words I needed to say sounded. I'm going into surgery. You're going to tell me the truth. How serious is it? A friend of mine used to say when someone got really sick, when you're in trouble like this, you knock on every door and other people will tell you. I got the same disease. I'm the one and only. There's no need to be shy. And they start knocking on your mother's door. The door never closes. He always stands on the threshold, with his back turned to his own life, and sees and treats only those who knock. And now, as busy as he is, Martin doesn't say no. He's just leaving for surgery, and he'll call when it's done and call to see him. There was still life to be lived. The journey home is 2 hours long with a layover. An evening where I sit with the phone on my lap, and what's on the ringer? The journey to the hospital in the late twilight. I realize it's a shame to be so afraid for myself, to walk away from serious illnesses. Children. Fate is ruthless to the unrepeatable. When she was lying in the ward in full consciousness and talking to her mother, the doctor came in and said, "How much can you waste medication? She's already dying. It's time to take the needle out." What am I compared to them? Kate, what's going to happen to her? I mean, she's literally not on her feet yet. 800 hours. 9. 10 o'clock call. Come on in. I'm still in surgery. He's done with the surgery. I know the feeling. No, one wine won't make you as drunk as this fatigue. We're sitting here, 2 ogled men. He's fatigued, I don't seem to be driving, says Martin after the examination. And with these words, I can survive the weekend. But on the day when I have to go to oncology to find out the results of the function, I'm being absolutely disgraceful. I lie on the couch, stuffed with sedatives, surrey, brandy. I lie there, numb, and occasionally start sobbing. Function finds no cancerous cells in the tumor tube they have to operate. But the prognosis is good. After stressing a few days later, I start to have pain all over everything: my back, legs, joints, fingers, and toes. And even eyelids pills don't relieve this pain. I can't even sleep with my foot on the pillow. Oncology inpatient. Doctor, there are 2 such experienced doctors here. They walk down the corridor swiftly, keeping their heads down, seemingly not noticing anyone. It's only seeming. They may not remember their names, but the case is perfect. Here you are, 3 people with your fingers in the women's dressings. What's your last name? Come with me. I want to watch you affectionately, not only with the seriously ill. Strange, says the doctor, having examined me. I don't. 30 years old watching a woman bruise. 2 centimeter swelling. Would have noticed, do you think? Go to our cleaner, get a third opinion. Otherwise, I shouldn't have authorized you. But the ultimate decision is mine. The ultrasound cleans, finds the tumor immediately, and outlines the breast with a black marker. Before marriage, sensuality is in question. I am taken into surgery. I learn later that I am lucky, that people like me, after 3-4 months of waiting in line, being put in inpatient units, go up to the nurse's office every day and wait hopelessly for another hour. Finally, the nurse comes out. The doctors don't have time for you today. Dismissed. They get up, wander through the wards. Monday, Tuesday, everyone's home with husbands. Children Wednesday. You're lucky. The doctors have half an hour today. 2 of them quickly changed their clothes, took off their rings and earrings to the elevator and me. And you next time lucky literally evaporate, to in a minute already in full readiness to emerge elevator. We are sitting in the anteroom of the operating room. 3 women in line, wrapped in white sheets, right sledding in a Roman bath. There are no Euro renovations here. This is where the tiles fall off. This is where the most difficult minutes are for doctors. On the operating table, you're literally disintegrating. Arms out to the sides and strapped down for anesthesia. I really don't care what it takes, as long as I get a diagnosis. It's nice to have a screen so I can't see. Thank God, The nurse hangs the tape on a special holder in front of my face. The minutes drag on endlessly. The lights go out. And who's gone? Just the nurse. Stand to my side. Don't rush for another hour. We're waiting for the 2 more results. Good quality. They're letting me go home. By 8 o'clock, I go to oncology for dressings. There are 20 of us in line. And I, who still has a moral, so amazed and delighted. Shoulder hurts, complains a woman without one breast. This week, 200 cans of tomatoes twisted. Have you already bought underwear? Another woman asks. And what about for 1,100? This is the third. And where did you get it? The fourth greedily asks. Show me. The woman looks around the corridor is a doctor, a very young guy. I wasn't there. She pulls up her shirt. Here's a beautiful bra with lace all over it. I've got this, and I've got a hallway full of it. Naked. The doctor just shakes his head. But you're good. The doctor can't even see me anymore. I'm a thing of the past to him. I'm not offended at all. He's got 10 complicated cases, 10 rooms, beds in the hallway. Thank him for everything. But why doesn't anyone believe me? Martin asks. I said good quality. I'm not saying that I believe him so much that going to the operation, I touched the wall of his house, as I would lie down in the temple to the icon, asking for help from above. I have known for a long time that God is with him. That's what happened to Kate's mom. And thank goodness everything turned out all right. By Christmas, Betty was back in school. David's help was invaluable. He helped the young mother get a part-time job at the university in one of the departments. There was not much time left until graduation, and Betty's mother said she would take care of the baby herself. Her daughter sent her the money she had earned, and everything settled down. Jacob sobbed with complete freedom. She knew that if she began to decide through the courts, it would be difficult to enter the muddy water. She decided to avoid it. Much later, she found out that the professor had contacted her mom and was sending her money every month too. And as a practical woman, she decided to accept that help. But she didn't say anything broader. It's not easy as it is. And when my daughter graduates from university and gets a job, I'll just save the money the father sends for Clara, the mother thought. David had a crush on her. I think he even dreamed about her. He often thought of her. How sometimes you fall in love in spite of your own plans, calculations, attitudes. But he realized that after everything that was going on, Kate would not give him a chance and sent money for his daughter. Thought that if Kate ever found out about it, he would not look like such a scoundrel in her eyes. The hobby friends graduated at the same time. At Kate's house, they had a feast. As the girl said, only for her own people. Betty in the kitchen tried her best to set the table beautifully. David, Maria, if it wasn't for you, thank you. She stood with a glass of champagne in her hand and tears in her eyes. Oh, don't worry about us. Here's a favor for you. Anything always on Kate's mind. I mean, she's a bright head. And now to go to grad school. Then I'll take her to Germany for surgery. That was the plan. So what? So she wants to go back to where she was born. Liam's back, working where he did hers. It felt like Maria was in deep distress. I'm not saying I'm leaving for good, Kate said quietly, but we must see Kostya and decide together what to do next. We only waved our hands in the heat of the moment. Her old life seemed to her, if not hell, then purgatory, from which she had escaped with great difficulty. And the fact that Kate had decided to return to those parts filled her soul with fear, while Kate was joyful, just waiting for what she had dreamed of all her life. She insisted, and a few days later her relatives put her on a train of places in street. Well then, she tried to cheer up her parents. Maybe I'll come with you for the 1,000th time, Mom. No, I'll come. You'll see, and you'll send me to Germany. I will. Mother nodded, trying to smile, but wiping away her own tears. Liam met Kate at the station. They stood embraced for so long that they didn't notice the passengers leaving. And then they talked, interrupting each other and yet understanding each other half-heartedly. And our house is boarded up. I'll keep an eye on it. Don't think about it. If you want, even today you can go in there, and your mom is waiting for the room. She has prepared pies for you on the table. What with the raspberry jam, you'll be picking raspberries soon. She will. Liam laughed. Everything was already agreed between them. So they would apply this week too. Neither of them wanted to wait any longer. And Kate, having lived in the city most of her life, realized that her place was here and at the university. That's why she chose biology. A job would be found at least as a teacher at school, teaching the kids to love the local nature she loved so much. At home at Lyams, the girl was so cheerful and talkative, as they had not seen her for a long time. The lush pies were good, and so was the flavor. Tea was brewed with herbs. They sat at the table until nightfall, and then Kate slept as soundly as she had in recent years. The air here is a special froth more often, she said. It was a few days after her arrival. The whole family was sitting down to dinner. Kate carried a teacup card and suddenly dropped it. The hot tea spilled over the table into her lap. Liam's mother shrieked. Liam became alarmed. Kate looked up into Kate's face. "What's wrong?" "Are you feeling okay in there?" said Kate, pointing to the window and not taking her eyes off him. "Did you see that? What's wrong?" The man's face pressed against the glass, so scary, unfamiliar. "My God!" Liam's mother believed her at once, and the young man ran outside to see who had frightened Kate. It was already dark, and he didn't see anyone. Kate was amicably reassured. Liam's mother suggested that it might have been the Alki neighbor who lived near them. Probably came to borrow money. Yeah, he saw a stranger and was shy. Kate nodded and pretended to calm down, but she couldn't sleep for a long time. She dreamed of that pale face in which she recognized familiar features. No, it couldn't be, of course. Probably her subconsciousness called up in her memory the past appearance of her father. So she had imagined it. Then came the bright sunny days when Liam returned from work. He always took Kate for a walk. It was as if it was easier for her to walk here. They reached the far cellar where it was already beginning to mature. They visited a forest stream. Since the hunting huts did not want, Kate did not want. It has long been in negative condition, standing without windows and doors. There's nothing to see there, Liam agreed. You know how there's nothing to see? Is the house an abandoned barn, or will we be taken apart for firewood? And the hut was quickly taken over. But it's not convenient to carry it far from here. So the walls are intact. If I see this place, I'm afraid I'll hallucinate. Kate shook her head. You know, I'm much more aware of the past now. I can remember scenes I've long forgotten. How did my mom get me out of there? I can't imagine. Liam hugged the girl. He was much taller. Kate felt his strong arm pressed against his chest. She became calm. She really wanted Liam to tell her that the past was in the past, that she would never meet her father again, that he would protect her from all harm. But Kate didn't ask to be reassured. For too long, she had indoctrinated herself to be strong. You can't spring on the necks of others. Right now, she was trying to keep her cool. She had plenty of free time during the day. And if before she was studying, preparing for exams, now the work was alone waiting for Kostya, and she decided to pass the time by going out, walking without him. She wanted to put what she had learned into practice and see firsthand the plants and animals she had studied at university. Kate now knew the Latin names for the life cycle of Paulus and Hebrew. She felt more at home in the taiga than ever before. Liam was wary of the idea, but Kate's voice was firm. You know my strength. I won't go away for more than 2 or 3 hours. I need it to make me feel like a full person, not an invalid who needs a companion. In the end, Liam relented, only asking her to be sure to bring her hunting rifles with her. You haven't forgotten how to shoot. In general, in summer I don't know what should happen to be attacked by a predator in the vicinity of the village. And we haven't seen bears around here for a long time. But as they say, it's better to be careful. He picked up one of his rifles, an old, lightweight one. Kate always took it with her. That time she decided to pick raspberries and hung the gun on one of the branches. Beaten by a racer, she went deeper into the thicket. Time flew by imperceptibly. The bidon was almost full. When someone grabbed Kate's arm, the grip was firm, hard not to rip out the chassis. The girl looked up and literally in the freezing cold was walking to the spot. The same face she thought she had resolved into a nightmare. An overgrown bearded man. Father. Kate said him, and there was no doubt left. She couldn't even get a word out in response. I followed you. It was what Mom was most afraid of. And she herself had troll-fit Kate from somewhere. She didn't recognize her own voice. It got so thin and shaky that your mom thought she killed me. But I recovered, and now I'm far away living there. Skit Cage is abandoned. No one will ever find it. How do you know what I am? So I get out to see people from time to time. You can't do without it. So you and me, we're gonna make it. When I came to get salt and matches, they told me you'd arrived. Your mom didn't want to live with me. God be with her. That's what she left me helpless. I won't forgive that. You can't do that in the Taiga. I won't forgive you for separating us. No matter what you say, my blood is still yours. And for that I should be grateful. Kate pointed to her mangled leg. If it hadn't been for Mom, I would have died out there in the woods. What would you have said then? You bring up natural selection again. If Mom had gone crazy, that would have been okay too. A matter of everyday life that she herself did not notice how in place of fear comes from the Ash's rage. The nation, it seems, is not in. Her anger, once you've lived a little longer, you'll realize there's no place for a soft heart. Life is a cruel thing. You said it yourself. Remember, I don't belong here, and I don't want anything to do with you. Nonsense, Katya. Come with me. See how well we'll live together. We won't need anyone. Her father dragged her by the hand. Kate was definitely transported from a childhood, which she had to obey her father's every whim, when his will seemed inseparable. If she fell now, he wouldn't drag her to his abandoned hermitage. The fear she felt was more paralyzing than he could beat her with. He could let her go now for tomorrow, again devise some trap. He is clever and cunning and powerful. He might choose Kostya as his victim, so that she would have no reason to stay here, so that she would follow him out of desperation. But she had a chance. One single chance. The bidon, she said. I'll take it with me. I dropped it there in the cell phone. Her father even smiled. I think that's what Kate saw through his thick beard. Wait here, I'll get it. I said, don't be afraid. I can't physically run away, Kate said. He disappeared into the bushes and returned a couple minutes later with the bidon that Kate had dropped and locked up. The daughter stood changing her foot in the stump and leading the guns at him. Crazy, she whispered for all to see. You've been dead a long time. The moment Kate pulled the trigger, her own heart stopped for a few moments. They were meeting her at the airport. The plane from Germany was about to land. David, Kate, Mom, and Betty with her daughter in her arms. You say hello, Godfather, break the horse. Baby in front of Clara, just as long as the flight wasn't delayed. Maria was worried. That's how she got turned on. First the surgery, then these complications. I'd rather have a limp all my life than go through this. But Liam was with her nonstop. And I think that was a great support for her. And about the surgery, it was a Scooter decision, convincing his wife. What did you decide? Maria turned to Betty. Well, what would you have heard Jacob repenting? Said it took him a while to realize it. He was orphaned without me. Without us, that's us. So what? Betty shook the baby on his arm to make the girl more comfortable. We're going back like this. At this time, it was announced that the plane they were waiting for was coming in for a landing. Yet they couldn't wait to see Kate. Liam was walking behind her with heavy bags, and Kate was looking around in the crowd for her family. And when she saw her family, she waved her hand and walked as lightly as if it hadn't even happened. Past the massive stick of a heavy step, little Clara waved back at her and shouted hello.